The main character is a white-haired girl with blue eyes born from the union of a poor ice mage and a hybrid wolf girl. She finds a medicinal plant and is happy about it, saying that she is very lucky today because her family is able to survive by selling medicinal herbs, which she hunts for in the snowy fields, so poverty does not cause them much trouble. The girl, putting the grass in the basket, says that she will give it to her mother because it is good for pregnant women. Suddenly, the half-wolf hears someone laughing and startles. She is noticed by a trio of wolves, and pointing a finger at the girl, they begin to mock her. The little creature begins to tremble with fear. But the guys continue to poke fun at the girl, and one of them asks if she's out for a weed whacker, and the other asks if she's a vegetarian. The third one says she can't even hide her ears. Purebred wolves are abusive and cruel to the protagonist. One of the guys throws a hard object at her head, causing the half-breed to start bleeding. But her abuser doesn't seem very concerned. Stepping on the herbs, the protagonist was gathering for her mom. As she tries to pick up what she has spent so much time on, the wolf asks what's wrong and if her legs are holding her up out of fear. He wants to hurt the girl again, but she unknowingly defends herself and hurts her abuser. Looking at her hand, the protagonist notices that the grass she was holding has turned to ice. The wolf is furious at being hurt and asks how the mudblood dares to raise his hand at him. But the little creature is screaming at him not to come any closer because one more step and that ice flow. But the guy doesn't let her finish her sentence and starts laughing, asking his friend if he saw it. He also questions what good is dumb ice magic in lands where it's everywhere. And maybe the girl is being stupid because she's only half wolf. The wolf walks up to the girl and violently throws her against a tree. At the moment of impact, an unfamiliar image flashed through her mind. There was a human soul in it, and the little creature realized that this was her past life. And at the same moment, she remembered a novel she loved to read. The main character of Little Red Riding Hood was the head of the half-breed dragons. She met a half-blood wolf during the war with the wolves, and he asked to be rescued because he wanted to bring his older sister back to life. Little Red Riding Hood took a fancy to the begging guy and made him hers. Lying on the bed with a book, the girl states that this is exactly the kind of story she wanted to read and praises the author, saying what a beautiful look the attractive guy with the lugs has. Over the course of the novel, the white-haired only half-wolf gradually got along with Red Riding Hood. The main character really liked the hero in this novel, who cried sweetly, and she dreams of seeing it for real. But now that her dream had come true, she didn't look very happy. The girl couldn't believe that she had been reborn in the novel she had loved so much in her past life. Realizing that this place is Red Riding Hood's world, she quickly jumps up from her seat, knocking her abuser to the ground, and runs away. The same one yells at the little creature to stop and threatens to catch her. Only Half-Wolf associates the author with a madman, though she herself has said she wants to see it for real. At home, the girl's mother is waiting for her daughter Eve, telling her unborn son Zion that until his older sister comes, they will not see a warm dinner. Eva, on the other hand, recalls the events of the novel and realizes that the main character is her unborn baby brother. In the novel Little Red Riding Hood, where humans lived together with half-bloods, half-wolves, and half-dragons, harbored a strong hatred for each other. The feud began when a wolf stole the heart of the dragon's head. After losing the heart that she wanted to give to her lover, the head died because she could not control her overflowing power due to anger and grief. Legend has it that Little Red Riding Hood's brother also had only one heart, and at the end of the story, death awaited him because he failed to curb his power. She blamed it on the wolves and made a sweep in the north. In this novel, Eve was the main character's sister who was put down like a dog by Red Riding Hood. Standing with an axe, the protagonist associates the author with a madman because she already has a difficult childhood and the future will be bleak. We have thoughts of escape, for the girl does not want to sink into eternal sleep. The main character's mom hears a strange sound outside and decides to see what it is. When asked by her mother about what is happening, Eva replies that wolves have damaged their house and said that if the family doesn't leave, they will be killed. Eva comes to the decision that it is impossible to allow the two protagonists to meet, and for this she has to leave the house, keeping her rebirth a secret to keep everyone safe. The mother hugs her daughter and reassures her, saying that if they go deep into the forest, it will be safer, and she will take care of her daughter. But it was as if someone laughed at the plans of the protagonist, because after the birth of Zion, Mom got worse. There was no wolf nearby to help deliver the half-breed. Holding her daughter's hand, the mom argues that good things happen to good kids, so instead of hitting someone, you should show them kindness. Eva looks at her mother with tears in her eyes. The white-haired lady tells her daughter she's sorry and sinks into eternal sleep. The main character can't hold back her tears, and realizing that this is her reality from now on. Both parents have abandoned them, so the girl herself will protect Zion at all costs. After many years of living deep in the woods, Eve stumbles upon a little girl lying in the snow, and you think, what is a child doing in a place like this? The main character notices that the girl has a fever and hopes that someone else will find and help her. But remembering her mother's words that good things happen to good children, she decides to help after all. Whether she felt sorry for the girl, left out in the cold, or whether her mother's words influenced her, Eve picked her up and carried her home, not realizing the consequences of doing so. A couple days later, the protagonist is met by her younger brother. The older sister asks him if everything was okay and if strangers came by. The little only half-wolf replies that everything was fine. The older sister strokes the boy with white hair on his head, saying what a good boy he is, and asks if the girl she found in the snow is awake. But Zion sadly replies that she's been sleeping for a long time and thinks the girl hasn't rested yet. But it's been 3 days. Eva sends her little brother to get cold water and a towel, saying it's probably because of the heat. But a sick little girl is not helped by even the best herbs, and taking her to the hospital would be difficult given their circumstances. The protagonist lies on the bed beside the girl and ponders the rightness of her actions. But it was also dangerous to leave the baby there. Eve places her hand over the sick girl's arm and apologizes that there is nothing else she can do to help her. At the touch of her savior, the girl comes to her senses. Eve asks how she's feeling. But when the child opens his eyes, the protagonist notices that they are red like rubies, and in this world, only one race has red eyes. At that time, the little brother returns with water, and Eve hides it behind her back. If the girl remembers correctly after her death, the one who took Zion was the main character of Little Red Riding Hood. In the novel, Little Red Riding Hood asked the guy who she was to him. He muttered, while crying pitifully, that the girl is his patroness, the very words Eve hears now from the little girl she saved. She argues that calling her a patroness is a bit over the top and glosses over the fact that if this girl is really Red Riding Hood, why was she up north so early? After all, in the original story, their first meeting took place when they were adults. The oblique lady is buttering up whether the course of events has changed. Her brother peeks out from behind her, but Eve tells him not to show himself and shoves him back behind her. The little only half-wolf doesn't understand why he can't see her and asks if they can talk later. The protagonist realizes that if they meet now, it will end up like in the original story and tells Zion that she might get scared, so he should wait outside. The girl, however, sitting on the bed, apologizes to her patroness for saying this only now and thanks her for saving her. Eva says it's nothing, because that act was the right thing to do. The young lady was worried, however. The little girl is perfectly fine. The main character asks herself if she thinks the girl is dangerous because she's a child for now, and thinks that if she and Zion don't see each other, her plan will continue. The plan for survival in this crazy story is to buy a castle, but not as described in fairy tales. For their safety, Eve would like to live in the human world. Only half a wolf remembers his father, because the intermediaries only help wolves whose identities are known get into the country. Poor commoners without a name won't be allowed in. But nothing is impossible in any world if you're strapped for cash. So her ambitious goal is to buy a castle with Sion and move to the human world. That's why the young lady memorized a book on medicinal herbs left to her by her father and saved money by selling valuable herbs. However, she didn't know that the events of the story were mixed up. If she brings Red Riding Hood home safely and without incident, only time will separate her from a happy ending. The protagonist is already imagining how brightly the sun will shine for her in the human world, but her musings are interrupted by the girl she rescued asking where she is and who she is. Eve is shocked at what she hears and asks what Red Riding Hood is saying. She hopes that line doesn't mean the same thing. And think about the fact that the author couldn't have done that. But the little girl says with annoyance that she doesn't remember anything. The protagonist crouches on the floor in despair and curses the author. Then she asks if the girl really doesn't remember anything at all. But in response, she hears that the child only remembers that she was hot. Something seems to have happened to Little Red Riding Hood before she passed out. But Eva wonders if that's what caused the memory loss. She's already envisioning the scene as she tells the girl that her name is Rachel, and she's a half-dragon warrior who controls fire, and her brother is the ruler of the South, and now she can go home. So she can't say for sure, and therefore wonder if she'll need to take the baby there herself. But this option immediately falls away, as for a wolf to stick to the land of dragons is akin to suicide. The child apologizes and claims he can't pay his rescuer with anything. Eva says it's no problem, and the little one doesn't have to pay. But the girl claims she really wants to thank her patroness. She asks if she can stay until her memory comes back. And the protagonist can already hear the sound of her plan drifting away, followed by her life rolling into a pit of poverty. At that time, the knights are running through the forest looking for the red cap. Their lord asks if they have found it, but they answer that they haven't yet. The man asks what they end up doing. A black-haired man with ruby eyes orders his servants to find the girl immediately, or they will lose their heads. He wonders to himself where Rachel is. Eve is walking with a red hat through the market when a little girl addresses the main character as Mrs. Patroness. Then the latter says that Rachel can sleep as her sister. Then the girl asks the patron sister where they are going, and she replies that they are going to see the doctor and buy some clothes at the same time. And then the little lady asks why they need to hide their faces. But in response, they hear that otherwise they will catch cold, and anything can happen. Eve realizes that this is a stupid excuse to match the ones in the novel Little Red Riding Hood. The girls are approached by a nice-looking man with purple hair and are greeted. The protagonist asks why he came so late, because he said he would bring a good product today. There is a secret alleyway near the square that few people know about. Eva sneaks in here to sell herbs to her regular customers. A man inspecting the goods and sees that they are of good quality. Firegrass only grows in mountainous areas and is easily ignited, emitting a red flame. The buyer asks how much he can buy it for. But when he hears the price of 10 gold bars, he gets shocked and asks why it's so expensive. The protagonist asks what's so amazing about it, because it's fire herb of the highest quality, and she won't give a discount even if he buys it in bulk. During the transaction, Eva has to hide her face and change her voice to avoid revealing her identity. Otherwise, she'll be looked down upon if only because she's a girl. However, only Half-Wolf claims that there is a way to buy her much cheaper, and the man wonders what that way is. Eva suggests that he examine the girl beside her. After looking at the little girl, the shopper asks who she is, and he hears that she is the seller's sister. But the man keeps asking questions and asks why on earth the merchant brought her here. But Eva tells him to do what she asks because he's a doctor. The stranger greets the girl and asks her what her name is, assuring her that everything is fine and she shouldn't worry. Placing his hand on the child's forehead, he asks the little girl if she is an obedient girl. After the examination, the doctor clarifies whether Red Riding Hood said that she doesn't know why she lost consciousness and that she doesn't remember anything. The main character, fixing Rachel's scarf, says she's not feeling well right now. The stranger isn't sure, but the effects of the injury seem serious to him. In such cases, memory usually returns to patients within a couple of days. The man asked what exactly happened to the girl, and furthermore, her temperature was unusually high. Eva says she had a fever a couple days ago, so it may not have subsided yet. The doctor begins to suspect the protagonist because in the southern region, a child, the captain's younger sister, has disappeared. Only halfway through the wolf realizes that he's already figured out who she is. The stranger asks if she knows about north-south relations. I shriek that of course she does, because she's a wolf too, and it would be weird if she didn't know and asks if it concerns her. The man claims he doesn't know what the trafficker is getting, but he should be careful and leaves. Eve thinks his reaction is quite expected, and we need to get the girl back to where she belongs as soon as possible. After all, if this continues, the dragons will finish off the protagonist. Rachel worries about her patroness. The same one offers to go home and asks what the little girl would like for lunch. In response, she hears that the girl will have anything if Eve cooks it. The lady with white hair notices that Red Riding Hood's aura is incredibly cute and reassures herself that everything will be fine and the girl will definitely not kill her patroness. The girl glanced at the rack of one of the stalls and asked what kind of thing was there. The main character replied that it is a dream catcher and it helps catch nightmares. Rachel's sullen red eyes reminded Eve of the plot of the novel, where Little Red Riding Hood, having lost her only older brother, never slept peacefully again. As soon as she closed her eyes, the same nightmare would immediately begin to plague her. It was only by meeting Zion that she was able to overcome her pain and suffering. The main character asks if the girl wants a dream catcher. The same tries to refuse because she doesn't want her sister to spend money on it. But Eva tells the girl to stand still and goes and buys the thing and then gives it to the little girl, saying that from now on she will have only good dreams. Rachel thanks her sister patroness, and when she asks if they will go home now, Red Riding Hood says yes with a sincere smile on her face. In these troubled times, Eve has unknowingly become the savior of the heroine who will finish her off. Eva comes home to be greeted by her brother and Little Red Riding Hood. The main character runs up to her and asks how the day came and if she sold a lot of herbs. The white-haired lady talks about her progress and reports that today she still stopped by the market on her way home. She tells the kids they are so cute and asks if they have been playing. Zion replies that he will now be able to help the main character braid her hair. She replies that she will wait and whisperingly asks if her brother has shown his ears to Red Riding Hood. He didn't, and it alarmed her to think that the girl didn't suspect anything yet. But judging by her reaction, the white-haired lady concluded that their secret Red Riding Hood had not yet learned. The moment Eve decided to take Rachel under her wing, they gave her a new name, Ruby. A little girl claims she can braid hair too, and the protagonist says she'll expect hairstyles from her as well. Then she does, announcing that it's time to make dinner and asks the kids to clean the house. Even though the white-haired lady has read novels with the name of Red Riding Hood, but she can't use it so easily in communication. The protagonist is happy that the kids are getting along and notices that Ruby's eyes are shining like rubies and thinks it's very beautiful. Eva, having prepared the food, wishes you a pleasant appetite. After they sit down at the table, Robbie asks the protagonist for her hand. Zion W. wonders and asks her sister why the girl only eats cold food and why they hold hands at the table. But the thing is, those who are vulnerable to the cold, like she and Zion, gravitate toward warmth, and food is no exception. When the lady with white hair served the little girl a hot meal, she looked a little worried. The protagonist thought she was tired of eating the same thing 3 days in a row, but Red Riding Hood said it was okay. Eve was a little saddened by the sad expression on Rachel's face, but seeing that the girl had eaten everything, she calmed down. That night, however, the heat of the food combined with her own unusually high body temperature to make her sick. The protagonist thought about the ferocity of the fire element in dragons and berated herself for not realizing it sooner. Fortunately, Exposure to the cold during the day cooled her down and she recovered quickly. Ava answers Cyan's question by saying that Ruby hasn't got a fever yet, so she can only eat cold food and strokes her head, telling her to eat. The brother gets jealous of his sister and asks what about him. The white-haired lady strokes her little brother on the cheek and tells him to eat more too. In the morning, while the children are still asleep, Ava is about to go to work, but hears Ruby calling her, asking if her patroness is going to the market. The main character hugs the baby and asks why she woke up so early. She also states that she will be back soon. Little Red Riding Hood asks Eva not to leave and to sleep with her a little longer. But if the protagonist doesn't go, she won't make any money. A little girl asks what her patroness needs a lot of money for. In the future, she wants to escape before Ruby kills her. But she can't respond that way. So she says it's so they can move to a better place. Then the girl pulls an expensive-looking ring out of her pajamas and says she picked it up in the woods. She apologizes for going into the woods, even though the white-haired lady asked her not to go out without permission. Eve warns the girl that if she walks alone, she will be attacked. She realizes Ruby is bored at home, but doesn't know how to resist this cuteness. My sister says she'll be back early, and they'll all play snowballs together. Little Red Riding Hood is very happy about this. The main character asks if the little girl will wait for her. Then she suggests that the girl should go to sleep because she is still sleepy, and she will save the ring that the little girl gave her. Having said goodbye to her patroness, Ruby turns around and heads towards the fireplace, saying what a white-haired lady was choking, for she had hinted at selling the ring. By lighting the fireplace with her fire powers, the girl says that excessive stupidity is also a sin. A few days ago in the southern region, Ruby was lying in bed in not very good condition. The young lady, who was most likely a doctor, said it was an idiopathic disease that causes fever. They have tried so many treatments and the baby is not getting any better. The lady tells the girl's brother to prepare for the worst. Guy is stunned by these words, and his fire elemental is out of control. The maid shouts to her master to control his inner fire element, or both relatives will be in danger, and asks him to take a deep breath and calm down. The captain says not to worry because he has no trouble controlling himself, and asks the doctor to take care of Rachel. A little girl calls out to her brother, and he excitedly asks how she is feeling. The little girl wants to touch her brother and extends her hand to him. The boy wants to touch his sister, but at the last moment changes his decision because the growth of the fire element inside the girl will become a threat to both of them. The captain only says he didn't expect his sister to suddenly lose consciousness. Rachel was very upset by her brother's actions. The same one asked if she was sure she was feeling okay. Little Red Riding Hood replies that she was just having a nightmare. The guy wondered what she'd been dreaming about that night. Since that day, the legend that dragons have only one heart had spread throughout the city. She thought these tales had something to do with the captain, so she insisted that she would save him no matter what it took. When the older brother came to his sister's room, he saw only a note on the floor of the balcony that said that the girl would return when she had dealt with the rumors that had been spread about the captain. It wasn't until weeks later that word got out that she had traveled north. When the boy went to look for his sister, his servant reports that a similar girl was seen in the square, and people say that's what she was with the stranger hiding her face. The guy asks if his ward is sure about it. The same responds positively and adds that the kidnapper bought her a dream catcher. The captain is very angry and says the criminal is hoping to lure his sister with a trinket. Thinking it's impertinent, he tells his servants to go there in person. As he walks down the snow-covered path, he wonders in his mind how the vile wolf dares to approach his sister. At the time, Eva comes home and her nose itches. The girl wonders if anyone remembers her. But then she remembers that the kids must be waiting, so she has to go home. The main character is approached by a man saying he is in a hurry and asks if she is selling anything interesting today. The white-haired lady realizes it's another junkie. She may be poor, but Eva was raised well, so she doesn't get involved in dirty deeds. Only halfway through the wolf tells the stranger to fuck off. Her morals don't allow her to mess with addicts, but the biggest reason is that they're all bad people. A drug addict notices a ring hanging around the girl's neck and says that it looks expensive, asking to sell the expensive thing because it doesn't fit the girl. Eve, on the other hand, is infuriated by this, and the stranger keeps asking questions. He asks about the price of the ring. The protagonist replies that by selling it, if the man right now will give her 50 million gold bars. The same one didn't expect that price, and you say it's unrealistic, then asks if the merchant despises him, and threatening to disappear, asks if he wants to get punched in the face. Eve, however, is sick of him, and she decides to calm the guy down using ice magic. She hates drug addicts because of cases like this. The girl quickly straightens out that jerk, and thinking she had no plans to watch such an abomination, she needs to hurry back to her beautiful Rachel and Zion. She turns around to the junkie and adds that even if he brings the money, the girl won't give up the ring because it's priceless to her. On the way home, the protagonist thinks she'll give the ring to Ruby as soon as she gets back. Though the little girl insisted she found it by accident, there's a possibility it's her personal item. The white-haired lady also notices that the dragon captain still hasn't found out where his sister is. She expected it to happen sooner. But a girl should think about it, and goosebumps run down her spine. But it can't go on like this for long, and it would be good to keep it a secret from Ruby that they're wolves, because Rachel herself certainly wouldn't guess it. They say that the captain is very fond of his sister, so Ava decided it wouldn't take long to find her. Although their house is hard to find because it's deep in the woods, and also the main character told the children not to go out for a walk, suddenly, the white-haired lady realizes that she looks like a kidnapper who keeps the children imprisoned. The girl notices that someone is following her, and since he has tracked her in the woods, he is not to be underestimated. Eve takes an apple out of the basket and freezes it. She looks around and says that she knows the stranger is hiding, so let him come out. At that time, the kids are sitting quietly at home. Ruby is writing something, and Zion is playing with toys. A boy with white hair gets cold, and Red Riding Hood asks himself why he is always cold. It intensifies the fire in the fireplace. Suddenly, the girl has a familiar feeling. She snaps out of her seat and tells Zion that she has to go out. The guy reminds Ruby that sister doesn't allow her to go out without permission, but she cries out that in such a situation, there is no point in remaining obedient, and it is necessary to save her. The boy with white hair doesn't understand who the little girl is talking about. Little Red Riding Hood, running out of the house to herself, replies that there is only one person she will save: their sister. The main character is still in the forest and thinks who could be chasing her. She assumes that it could be the brother of Little Red Riding Hood, but immediately refutes the fact because the dragon would immediately show up, not engaged in surveillance. Then she thinks about the possibility of the doctor turning them over to the wolves. Something moves in the bushes, and the girl throws an apple there, but there is no sound of falling. But Eva does not believe that anyone would resist after such a blow. She tells the stranger to come out and tell her what he needs, but he doesn't show. The protagonist didn't expect the stalker to show up so easily, but when the girl turns around and looks into the thicket, she sees a bunch of eyes looking at her. She thought she was being chased by 1 or 2 people, but there were far more. Eva realizes she can't do it alone, and at the same moment, a fire spreads through the forest. In the original story, Rachel is massacred, and the protagonist is already starting to assume that she was attacked by the apple and is looking around trying to find the little girl. But he only sees her older brother. Eva realizes that he seems to have misunderstood, but she gasps and can't even say a word. The guy tells her to stop playing dumb. The protagonist, on the other hand, replies that she has done nothing wrong. The captain tells her not to joke with him because he has no mercy and patience to listen to the delirium of the girl. He'd already gotten used to the idea that the white-haired lady was a kidnapper. Only half a wolf thinks it's unfair. She grabs the captain's arm and, overflowing with determination, yells for him to at least listen first. The same is very surprised by the girl's actions and senses some danger. Moments later, the flames die down, and Eve feels a loss of strength. The main character says she tried to take care of the guy's sister, and no amount of money will be enough to pay her for her kindness. She says the captain is a cruel bastard. Only halfway through the wolf faints, and the gentleman with the ruby eyes keeps her from falling. At that moment, Ruby runs up to them and asks how dare the man hurt her sister. She calls her brother a villain. Eva wakes up at home and thinks of everything as a dream. Rachel screamed and then ran up to her, the protagonist remembering the captain's face when his sister called this one a villain. After that, the white-haired lady realizes that it wasn't a dream and that crazy dragon was there. She hears someone running toward her. It's Ruby and Zion, the kids jumping on their sister and hugging her, the brother asking if she's okay and the sister adding if she's better. Eva, touched by his opinion of the children, thanks them for their concern and begins to comfort the boys. Zion says with tears in his eyes that he was very much afraid because he thought his sister was dead. Ruby adds that he wasn't the only one who thought so. The two of them looked pitifully at the main character, so I thought what a huge elephant they made out of a fly. In her thoughts, she asked the children to stop after all she was alive. She hugs her angels, saying she's fine, though she herself almost cried when she saw how upset they were. The boy with white hair says his brother left for a while and said he would be back soon. Eve doesn't understand who Zion is talking about, but then realizes that he is referring to Red Riding Hood's older brother. She remembers that when she touched his hand, she felt as if all her strength had been sucked out of her, and checks to see if she had ears and a tail, because if they saw the true nature of the protagonist, she would never wake up. The captain is just returning to the house and notices that the door is of terrible quality because it is not secure at all. The moment Eve and the boys' gazes crossed, the girl was speechless. Red Riding Hood's older brother notices with a smile on his face that the protagonist is awake and says he thought he wouldn't wait. The half-blood had only just gotten a closer look at him. She hadn't realized he was so attractive. The guy noticed the look on Eva's face and asked if he had anything on his face. She said no and apologized, and then motioned for the captain to follow her. They all sat down at the same table, and there was ice in the dragon's cups, for the hot stuff would make them sick. The children stayed close to the white-haired lady. An awkwardness hung in the air, so Rachel's older brother began to speak. He said his name was Noel Ramier. The guy had a lot of questions, but first he decided to apologize for what happened in the woods. Eve replied that there was nothing wrong with that, and thought to herself that he was more polite and kind than she thought, and she didn't seem to know anything about dragons at all. She looked at her little brother and realized why Noel had attacked her. After all, if it were him, the protagonist would be distraught to learn that her scion had been kidnapped. But she still thinks it can't be denied that it was overkill because the guy almost killed her. She thinks about making amends for all the trouble she's caused. She looked at the captain's face and immediately thought he'd be willing to compensate. Her she-wolf instincts are kicking in. The guy excitedly asks if the white-haired girl is doing well because her face is all. But the protagonist doesn't let the guy finish his sentence, saying that everything is fine and she was just thinking about something. She asks what happened after all. Noel apologizes for such a late explanation and says that she is actually Rachel's older brother. His little sister suddenly disappeared. That's why he came all the way out here. But the girl doesn't understand what's going on and asks who Rachel is. The captain asks the girl why she's pretending like they don't know each other. But little Red Riding Hood embraces her benefactress and tells her of Noel's strangeness, for he calls her his sister. Ava, on the other hand, realizes that the handsome man is really the girl's brother, but she can't say she knew that, so she has to play dumb. She asks Noel how she can believe him if the girl insists she doesn't, but he assures her that he's not lying and asks the girl for her hand. The little girl doesn't trust the guy, so she hesitates, but after Eve's words, she extends her hand. When their hands stop close to each other, a flame erupts on her older brother's hand. Rachel quickly pulls her hand away, and says that she was very frightened because her hand was on fire. The main character reassures Little Red Riding Hood, saying she will protect the girl. Scion turns to his sister, and she, thinking that he too is frightened by the flames because she sees him for the first time, the girl does not know how to explain everything to him. But she doesn't even have time to say anything before Rachel turns her head to her and says she's scared. She asks Zion to take her hand as well. The boy doesn't understand why he has to take her hand, but still takes her hand in his. Noel doesn't understand why his sister doesn't recognize him. As the protagonist asks the child if she has gotten better, she replies that she has. Then, with a smug smirk, turns to his brother. As the fire burns in the fireplace, the older brother asks Rachel why she keeps not remembering him, but the girl just turns her back on her brother, to which the man simply puts a hand to his face and sighs. Ava sympathizes with the guy because now he's a villain to her sister. She asks Noel not to be upset, because when they first met, the girl did not remember anything. Seeing how upset Noel was, the protagonist decided to tell him the whole story of their first meeting. After learning that Rachel had passed out, the guy got angry and thought it was all because of the damn wolves. Eve, however, realizes they're screwed if the captain finds out they're wolves, too. The brother asks if the white-haired girl is okay, but she replies that she's okay and realizes that he's worried about what happened. The guy says he should have put out the fire on that, has a problem with it. Noel Ramier is considered the strongest hero in history. He is endowed with extraordinary magic. He is described as one who can conquer fierce flames with just one heart. However, it also means that he has difficulty overcoming his own emotions and controlling his powers. The fire, which he was having trouble controlling, was put out by Eve. The girl wonders if this happened because she has the ability to freeze. For if so, there are many mages whose powers surpass hers. She'll wonder what Noel might not know about it. The main character decides to ask if this happened because of her ability to freeze. After all, as far as she knew, there were many wolves with similar strength in the north. Noelle asks suspiciously if the girl is a wolf, but Arta says it's just an assumption, and she is. But the girl can't say it. She had practiced saying she was not a wolf, but a human plenty of times. But now she couldn't get the words out. She tried to say it again, but she was halfway interrupted by a red cap. She tearfully asked her sister to chase the stranger away. But Eva began to assure the babe that the guy wasn't a stranger. After all, they look so much like each other. Natalie just shook her head and said that he had hurt her benefactress, which meant he was bad, and asked Scion what he thought about it. The brother began to nod and agree, saying that Ruby's brother was bad because he had hurt Eve. They both begged to kick Noel out. Little Red Riding Hood claims he's big, so he's scary and his eyes are red. The white-haired boy with white hair agrees with her on everything. And then he notices that Ruby has the same eyes, but when she gives him that murderous look, he gets scared. The captain, on the other hand, didn't know what to do. But the protagonist replies that the memories will return to her soon, so she asks the guy not to worry. Then the brother says he'll touch his sister lightly and it won't hurt. But Rachel turns away from him and hugs Eve harder, saying she doesn't like the black-haired man and will live with her sister. The protagonist in her thoughts asks Red Riding Hood not to talk nonsense and informs her that she is making her brother uncomfortable. Ruby looks at her brother in exasperation. The white-haired lady, noticing this, turns the little girl to herself and tells her not to look so angrily at her brother. But the girl shouts that if she has to go, she'll take the benefactor with her and asks her to go too. Even though Rachel is adorable, Eve says it's time for the baby to go home, which makes the baby start crying. The protagonist tried to reject her as gently as possible to get her home sooner. Noel realizes there's no choice. He asks the white-haired lady to do him a favor. The girl already realizes where this is going and indignantly asks the captain what he means. The guy says it won't take long, just until Rachel tries it on and trusts him. As Eva ponders this, the devil inside her tells her that there will be no second chance to meet such a handsome man and asks if he is not her type. The devil asserts that the girl should seize the opportunity and do as she pleases. Angel objects, because if Noelle finds out the truth, the protagonist will be killed. Eva is already preparing to refuse, because although about such a smarmy guy can only dream, but if he finds out that she is a wolf, she will be cooked on fire. But then the guy says he realizes he's done an unforgivable act, and it's shameful to ask the girl for a favor, but he pleads to do it for Rachel's sake. The main character's heart nearly leaps out at that. She says it's going to be quite difficult because she has personal reasons. Noel claims he'll repay her for her kindness, and the white-haired lady asks if he'll repay her with money. After the captain says yes, then the girl asks the children to leave them alone for a while. When Rachel's brother is about to leave the house, he says goodbye to the protagonist and hopes she will consider the terms they discussed and reiterates that he is very guilty and incredibly sorry. Eva says she would do the same thing if she were him. Such behavior of the guy was unexpected for the protagonist, because she thought that the captain of the dragons would refuse arrogant, and he even bowed to her. The guy is a little embarrassed, saying that he knows it's indecent to ask such a thing, but could the white-haired lady take his hand again? He adds that he didn't mean to insult the girl with this, and just wants to make sure. Eva understands the guy holds out her hand to him, but they're interrupted by Rachel asking why that guy is still here. She hugs Eve and looks angrily at her brother. The captain says frustratedly that he will go because his presence still disturbs the little girl. The protagonist says goodbye and tells the man to take care of himself. Noel asks the white-haired lady to explain everything to Rachel. Afterward, Eve suggests that the little girl return to the house. Lying down on the soft bed, she thinks about what a hard day today had been. Looking at her hand, she remembers the captain's words and wonders if he wanted to know more about her power. The girl doesn't know why, but she would prefer a walk in a blizzard to these conflicting feelings. A red-eyed little girl climbs onto her bed and plops down beside her. The white-haired lady approaches a girl named Rachel, but the girl says it's weird for her to hear herself called by that name. The main character states that the little girl will soon get used to it and asks if she was scared. The girl says that she was very much frightened because the fire burst out of her hand. Eva strokes Rachel, thinking that it will be difficult for her to explain everything, and the latter asks if the white-haired lady is scared too. The main character is of course scared, but she has to reconcile the little girl with her brother first of all, so she asks the girl if the captain seemed cool to her. Rachel, on the other hand, is surprised by such a question and interjects, then asks the white-haired lady to tell what exactly is cool about him. The protagonist thinks Noel has taken a fancy to the girl, too. She says he's tall and his shoulders are broad. Eve has never seen anything like it. Rachel asks if she likes guys with broad shoulders. The benefactor says it's her type. Then the little girl asks what about looks. Eva says his face is insanely attractive. The kid says that Noelle comes out as her sister's ideal. The protagonist agrees with this fact, but wolves are avid enemies of dragons, so she replies to the girl that this is not true. The girl looks a little downcast after those words and asks the half-breed if she wants Rachel to be friends with him, because if she does, she'll try. Eva jumps out of bed and asks if it's true. Her mind is full of questions about whether she was able to convince the girl and whether she changed her mind. Rachel says she can see her brother 3 times a week, but her benefactor needs to be with her because she's scared to be alone with the captain. Eva hugs the girl and states that she has no problem doing it, but once a week will be enough. Rachel, on the other hand, claims 3 times better. The main character is worried and says that 3 times is quite a lot. But the little girl doesn't want to change her mind, so she agrees. While Noel is walking through the forest, his servants ask, "What about that girl?" The captain looks at his hand and thinks that one light touch of it was enough to instantly calm the fire raging in him. He orders his underlings to send more men there to guard the house, saying they will continue to watch them. Zion walks into the room and asks what the girls are doing. Eve says they are discussing Rachel's brother. The brother, hearing that name, says he hates that guy because he wanted to hurt his sister. The main character says it was just a misunderstanding and the captain apologized. Then Cyan reminds the girl that she herself said not to judge a book by its cover and tells her how many dangerous people there are in the world. He also resents that Ruby is Ruby, and he doesn't want to call her anything else. Eve realizes that the main obstacle will be Zion, not Rachel, and wonders what to do now. The little girl decides to change the subject and reminds her benefactor that she promised to go play outside with them today. The protagonist says she almost forgot, though Cyan says there's a lot of danger there, so she probably shouldn't. But the boy does not agree with his sister and says that it is okay to play near the house because he also wants to go outside. The white-haired lady thinks she needs to be nicer to them today and tells the kids that she has things to do now, so let them go alone, but don't let them go too far from the house. The children rejoice at the news and run outside with smiles on their faces. Brother offers to make a snowman. Eve tells them to dress warmly or they'll catch cold. As Rachel ties the scarf tighter around the white-haired boy, the protagonist says to make a lot of delicious things for dinner, so they should not be late. The boys are very excited about this news and agree. They quickly jump out into the street, and the white-haired lady chases after them and tells them that if they spot a stranger, to let them run straight home. Eve reflects that, thankfully, Rachel has shifted her focus so far, and notices that she has a lot of work piling up thinking about where to start. Rachel leads a boy with white hair deeper into the woods. The boy says their sister told them not to go far. The little girl, however, isn't too thrilled about it and says she's going to show something Zion will like. The kid immediately starts listing what he likes: pork stew toys and cuddling with his sister. Little Red Riding Hood says it's childish. She shows the boy with white hair the fire out of her hand, and he marvels at it, saying it's cool. Distinguished knows her brother likes her fire magic. She recalls how one morning Cyan noticed the girl lighting the fireplace with her powers. He thought it was amazing and asked to see more. Rachel was surprised. The suit told the boy that she hadn't done anything, but he claimed he'd seen everything. Little Red Riding Hood said he just dreamed it, while Zion said his dream was magical and he would retell it to his sister. The little girl gave in and said she would show if he didn't tell his sister, but only once. Now the white-haired child warms his hands to Rachel's fire and says he is very warm. Red Riding Hood, thinking that Tat kept his word and did not tell his sister about what happened, asks us if the guy is warm. He replies that yes, and notices that the light, though small, is warming. He likes it. Suddenly, the little girl puts out the fire, and the boy with white hair notices that it has gotten cold. Rachel asks if Cyan thinks the weather up north is too cold. The boy with white hair replies that he asked his sister many times to move to a warmer place, but she refused, saying it wasn't time yet. Rachel doesn't understand because the white-haired lady told her she wanted to move to a better place. Zion says he will tell the reason if the little girl makes fire. Ta does so and notices that the guy is haggling like a sister. Afterward, he reveals that sister said she had a couple options in mind for their future. It could be a place no one knows about. Little Red Riding Hood thinks about what she said, her fire starting to flare up. Zion continues his story and says that Eve said she would try very hard to earn the castle. Rachel wonders if the white-haired lady's favorite things are a handsome man, a castle, lots of money, and a place no one knows. That means her big brother can grant her every wish. The fire girl gets bigger and bigger, so tells Zion that he knows how to fulfill all of his sister's wishes. She says they should go after that handsome guy. But the boy with white hair doesn't like that idea because he's bad and hurt his sister. Little Red Riding Hood claims it was a misunderstanding, and besides, he apologized, adding that her brother is very cool and can grant all of Eva's wishes. Also, Noel can take the boy with white hair to warm places, Zion, very happy about that fact, and Red Riding Hood says what a good boy he is, and suggests that he hide his ears. The boy with white hair excitedly says he was an accident and asks the red-eyed little girl to pretend she didn't see anything. Noda merely laughs off Sion and tells the man that he forgot about the tale. The boy with white hair panics and asks Ruby not to say anything about his sister, or he will be scolded. The little girl agrees, but with one condition: the white-haired child must not hate her older brother. They agree, and Zion asks if he should call the girl Rachel. The little girl says he can call her Ruby. In the morning, Ava sleeps peacefully in her crib, but then she hears someone knocking on the door. She gets tired from her bed and sleepily weaves to the door, not knowing who it was that came so early. Opening the door, she sees Noel. Then the sleepy girl remembers that the guy promised to stop by today. After the protagonist has changed her clothes, she asks the captain to forgive her for her unkempt appearance because she forgot about his arrival. Thoth, however, takes no offense and says he may have come too early and interrupted the girl's sleep. The white-haired lady says it's not his fault. Afterward, they go to Rachel's house, who is still sweetly asleep, for the children played late last night and nothing can wake them up now. Noelle puts a hand on her sister's head and notices that she seems to be having a glorious time. The guy asks if Rachel is giving Rachel any trouble. The new answer he hears is that the little girl is a very sweet and obedient girl. The captain notices that his sister is listening to someone for the first time. I ask you if this is true because she is very charming and often expresses egyo. Egyo means showing affection, often expressed through cute voice, facial expressions, and gestures. Rachel wakes up and sees her brother and benefactor sitting across from her. The little girl says the two of them look good together, and then closes her eyes again. Ava, flushed, says the one who probably hasn't gotten out of her sleep yet, and claims that she often talks in her sleep. The protagonist in her thoughts asks the captain to say something, because silence makes the situation even more awkward. Noel asks if this is the first time. The white-haired lady doesn't understand what the man means. Rachel's brother talks about their meeting, for Eve seemed familiar to him. The main character can't contain her laughter, so she turns away from the guy because she thinks about the old-fashionedness of such a way to get close to a girl. But the white-haired lady realizes that's not what he means. Only Half-Wolf says she won't claim, but she's only lived in the North since birth, so you think it's unlikely they could have crossed paths, and asks Noel if he could have gotten the wrong name. Suddenly, Rachel gets out of bed and talks about how retarded her brother is. The protagonist is shocked by this, but Rachel, with a sweet smile on her face, wishes her little sister a good morning. Looking at her brother, she is outraged that the type has reappeared and claims that she has become very hot. She feels as if someone has touched her in her sleep. The white-haired lady says it was her brother, and the girl may have passed on his warmth. Eva wonders how a dragon can feel heat, and thinks the girl may have been used to ice magic and the climate of the North. The protagonist notices that Noel and his sister are indifferent to each other, just like strangers. She decides they should get some help and asks what they're going to do today. Eve gets an idea. She takes Rachel's hand and says this and that, and takes her brother's hand. That way she could gradually get used to her brother's body temperature. But the little girl cries out that it's wrong. She takes the hand of her brother and her benefactress. Putting the two together, she says everything is great now. Eva is a little embarrassed and asks if she needs to hold her brother's hand too. She holds the guy's hand, but he looks like he doesn't really want to. The white-haired lady thinks he doesn't like it, so she unclenches her hand and apologizes, saying she'll have to hold his hand too. But Noel argues that there's no need to apologize. It was the first time he'd ever felt this much cold, and it was even a little unsettling. The protagonist asks the guy if he's okay, and notices that through their handshake, she feels warmth. She wonders if that's what he wanted to check that time. Suddenly, Sion walks into the room and asks what the couple is doing. Jumping up on the bed, he claims he wants to do that too, and asks me to support him by the hand too. Eve was a little upset that their handshake had been interrupted because she was, after all, very warm. Rachel asks the boy with the white hair why you had to drop in on them. And the protagonist tells her brother that you can't behave like that in front of a guest and invites him to sit next to her. But Zion doesn't listen and claims he wants to play the game too. Only Half Wolf asks in thought why the boy with white hair is so cranky today. She tells the kid that Rachel is now socializing with her brother and he shouldn't interfere with them. Eve fears that Noelle will notice Zion's ears and tail. The captain, on the other hand, claims there's nothing wrong with it and they played it cold and hot. He offers the boy with white hair to join, extending his hand to him. Zion says he loves that kind of thing and extends his hand in return. When he touches Noel's hand, the boy with white hair can't help but feel it's very warm. Eva. I like her brother's reaction. Since the captain isn't even related to them, the baby is getting a tail. The main character is very concerned about this and thinks it's time. Their bad ending. Only Half Wolf quickly covers his brother's tail with his dress and notes that they Rachel nor Noelle have noticed his tail yet. But the girl doesn't know what to do because his ears will soon be showing. The captain asks about the white-haired lady's well-being. Eve says the room just got a little hot. Noel guiltily says it's his fault. The main character prays in her mind that he doesn't look down and thinks she needs to distract him somehow. The white-haired girl says it was just a disclaimer, and she really meant to say she's a little cold. The girl puts her hands on the captain's arms. She tells Noel that his hands are very warm, and he's happy about it, saying he's glad Eve likes it. The main character is very angry with her brother. She tries every way she can to distract Rachel's brother and says his hands are like warm potatoes. In her thoughts, she asks for someone to stop this shame. Rachel puts her hands on the head of the boy with white hair and tells her sister to look, for Zion's hair is mussed. She claims the kid's hair sticks out like puppy dog ears. Zion realizes in horror that he has just almost made a big mistake. He hides his tail. Eve sighs in relief, and you notice she's still holding Noel's hand. She quickly pulls her hand away and apologizes, saying she was just thinking. Zion's still excitedly touching his head, and Rachel's showing him that it's okay. Noel says it's okay, because Zion is a friendly boy with white hair. The captain isn't very good at playing with kids, so he's worried. He puts his hand on the boy's head and tells him he's obedient, not like Rachel. Noel says he likes Zion. The same jumps on the captain and hugs him. The main character is shocked and asks Zion to go to her. But Rachel takes her hand, saying she's hot. Eva hugs Red Riding Hood and thinks to herself that her brother will drive a girl crazy someday. She just hopes he doesn't do anything crazy again. She tells Zion not to hit on Noel. But the boy with white hair doesn't even listen and tells the captain that he's warm like the sun, warm and big. Rachel's brother rejoices and says it's the first time he's ever been complimented like that by someone. He thanks Zion for this, and the boy with white hair notices that he is also very handsome. The kid tells her sister that this guy is her type. Noel is embarrassed by such words. Ava is also shocked by what he said and asks her brother in her mind what he is talking about. She asks Zion if he is still awake and asks him to move closer. The girl says he's still sleepy, so he's talking nonsense. But the white-haired kid, claiming that she kept saying she liked handsome guys, especially when they were crying. Such words make the half-breed's face blush. Eve asks Zion what's going on with him today. The main character puts Rachel on the floor and begins to pull her brother away from Noel. But he won't let the captain go. Eva, however, thinks he's had enough because few of them dare to reveal her secret in front of strangers. When Zion was a baby, every time he started to cry, the girl would make fun of him and say she liked a crying boy with white hair. Who knew karma would catch up with her for this? She mentally asks the captain to pretend he didn't hear anything, but the man hesitates and repeats in his voice about beautiful crying guys. The main character is almost crying already, thinking of all the bad words in the world. As evening falls, Noel leaves the estate and tells her sister that she'll be back soon. Then he says goodbye to Eva, but she doesn't look very happy for some reason. Apparently her life has taken a toll on her today. The captain, on the other hand, with a smile on his face, wants to ask the half-breed for something. But when his gaze falls on Rachel, he says that there's nothing important he wanted to say. The guy says it's time for him to go, and the protagonist says goodbye to him. She was still curious what he wanted to say. Walking through the woods, Noel begins to think it's dangerous for him to mess with strangers, as it could be risky. Because of his heart, he killed too many innocent people, including his parents. The guy can't control his frightening power. There's one thing he can't figure out. How did Eve manage to rein her in so easily? The guy does not know why, but even took the inner fire under control. At the mere thought of the girl at his chest, anxiety begins to pulse, burning his heart, and from his face does not come off the smile. The question reminded Noel of a dream he'd had a few days ago. The captain didn't realize where he was. His hand dyed black. The guy saw a persona coming toward him through the flames. It was all a blur, and I couldn't see his face. Noel realized that if the girl came any closer, she would get hurt. He started to tell her to stay away, but his tongue was slurring as he could barely breathe. He shouted to the stranger not to come near him, but the girl did not obey, and touching the captain put out all the fire. The pain that had tormented him so much was gone. Noel asked the girl to tell her name. After that moment, the memories cut off. Walking through the woods, Zero thinks it's all about Eve being his only escape from a deadly disease, which is why the thought of her makes the unconscious guy smile. Love at first sight has nothing to do with children in love affairs. Noel hears some rustling. Turning around, he sees his sister. Rachel tells the guy how sloppy he is. She calls her brother a dumbass, a jerk, and says he has no more intelligence than a mindless, fire-breathing reptile. Noelle looks at her sister in surprise. Her composure returns to her. Rachel argues the goodness of her brother not messing up her plan yet. Since Eve is a cowardly chicken, Rachel can't take her to such a dangerous place. Noelle asks her sister how she ended up here because it's not safe. The girl says it doesn't matter and claims that the white-haired lady likes guys who cry pretty. She asks her brother if he got the hint, but when he tries to ask what the little girl means, Rachel shuts his mouth, saying she hasn't finished her sentence yet. And he continues his story by saying that the most important thing is to be beautiful. Eve's ideal is a tall guy with broad shoulders, and if possible with money, she dreams of living in a palace. Red Riding Hood does not yet know which one. But the white-haired lady is a kind girl who clearly understands what she wants and tries to realize it. The captain asks, "So what?" His sister is already furious and asks if Noel is a fool. She yells that he fits the description perfectly and asks why he doubts it. A little girl tells her brother to just not convince himself that he has no sympathy for Eve. Noel, all red, says he has no feelings for the white-haired lady. Rachel screams that he's a jerk because how could he not notice his crush? After calming down, she says she will help her brother, but tells the one not to forget that he is a guy, and therefore should take the initiative in communicating with the one he likes. Rachel wakes up in a warm crib in the morning. She notices her sister getting ready to go somewhere. A little girl runs up to her benefactress and asks her if she is walking. Ava replies that she has some important things to do. Little Red Riding Hood asks if she will go to the market, and if her brother, that is that guy, gave her money. Only Half-Wolf replies that Noel gave a lot of money, but she has to visit a friend, and she'll be back soon so Rachel can take it easy and go get some sleep. The little girl says goodbye to the white-haired lady. But Little Red Riding Hood notices that her sister has taken a basket of herbs with her. Rachel thinks her brother gave Eve a lot of money, but she can't get enough. She speaks of the girl's ambition and approves of it, because that's the kind of girl who deserves to be her stepsister. But something bothers Little Red Riding Hood because I always cover my face when I go to sell herbs, so no one will recognize her, and she actually went to a friend's house. The little girl is horrified to come to the realization that this friend may actually turn out to be her boyfriend. Eva said she needed money, but not to live happily ever after with her boyfriend. Rachel quickly distracts you from such thoughts by saying that it's a possibility she wouldn't even consider. A little girl decides she needs to follow her sister, but suddenly behind her is Zion, who has just woken up. He asks where Ruby is going. The girl replies that she needs to get out. Well, the little only half-wolf asks where and says he's going too. Rachel doesn't like it very much because she wanted to follow her benefactress secretly and quickly return so that the boy with white hair didn't notice anything. But he ruined all her plans. She tells Zion that it's a very boring place, but he asks where it is because he's curious. Little Red Riding Hood realizes that if she doesn't take him with her, he will definitely follow and may get lost on the way back. So she gives in kindness for the guy to go with her, but asks Togo to promise to stick around. The kids are going out of the house to find their sister. Eve, walking through the woods, remembers Rachel's words. She thinks Noel gave her money and a lot of it. When the captain brought the white-haired lady sacks of gold coins, she asked what it meant. But the lad remembered Eve's words, saying she needed a lot of money. The protagonist thought the guy would despise her because of her strange preferences. Looking at the mech full of gold, she wondered how much money was in there and why the captain looked so pleased. Maybe giving away money was his hobby. Only Half-Wolf handed Noel the bag of coins back and said there was too much in there. But Noel started to object, saying that he didn't think there was enough there, on the contrary. And if more was needed, let the girl say so. He asked me not to worry about it. The protagonist wanted to ask how much he could add, but giving in to her instincts in the presence of a stranger was a bad idea, and she decided she had to decline. But the captain replied that she should not hesitate to ask for more, for he could give her as much as she wished. Eve took a handful of coins and held them out to Noel, and asked if she could exchange them for something more valuable, to the captain's smile. The same felt a little awkward and said the girl's name. That pushed her out of her thoughts, and she said, a little embarrassed, that once she'd spent it all, she'd ask for more. The half-breed's instincts had taken over her again a couple minutes ago. The protagonist wondered what would happen if she asked for a fortune. She thinks the captain is very naive, for it is worth taking his hand as his cheeks turn pink with embarrassment. Modest guys are her type. Ava tries to get away from these thoughts, because now that she has a lot of money, she can give the last order and go back to her children. She meets her customer. He greets her, saying it's been a while. This is one of the white-haired lady's regulars. He is a businessman who is always on the road for work, so he knows a lot and sometimes tells the girl interesting stories. A blue-haired man asks if the protagonist brought what he asked for. Only halfway through the wolf replies that she brought it. The buyer says that tigers in the East love healthy vegetables, so they like herbs. That's the most amazing thing a girl has heard from him. She says she's brought more. This may be the last day she does sales. The man asks why so suddenly, and if something happened. He also asks where he can now buy herbs for his tigers. Eve says that's already his problem. The man says he felt like they were close. The protagonist replies that it just seemed to him, and she asks if the businessman has found out what she asked for. He asked if the girl was talking about contacting middlemen for illegal migration. For regarding this, the man asks if and only Half-Wolf knows that they have a new ruler. Eve asks if he has anything to do with her question. The blue-haired buyer says that several middlemen have been arrested, and illegal migration has been strictly prohibited, and it is better not to do it nowadays. Eva was very upset at this news. The businessman began to calm her down, because they still have plenty of time, and the girl should wait for the ban to be lifted. But the protagonist doesn't have a lot of time on her hands. The buyer says he wants to give the girl a parting gift. Eva looks at him and asks what it is. But the man says they are rare herbs that are unlikely to be found or bought anywhere. The protagonist asks if it's drugs. The businessman says it's something like that. Only Half-Wolf lunges furiously at the man and says she doesn't want that kind of thing. The guy says the girl is more honest than he thought, and owls the gift in the basket, assuring that she'll love the amazing taste of the new world. But the girl only claims it will be a world of death when the cold weather hits, and adds that she'll throw the gift away on her way home. The businessman jokes that knocking cold in the north will not lead to death, unlike heat stroke. But the half-blood isn't really amused because the threat of dying from the heat really hangs over her. After saying goodbye to her customer, the girl heads home. She thought she would be able to move to a warm place when she saved up, but she didn't expect it to turn out this way. Eva, on her way home, thinks that she has no choice and will have to live up north and take care of Rachel for a while longer. She also has to earn money to make good contacts. But the protagonist wonders what will happen to her if the dragons find out that she and her brother are wolves. She immediately drives away the negative thoughts because there is always a way out, and thinking about their babies. As she gets closer to the house, she sees that the door is open. Having only gotten halfway inside, the wolf doesn't see the guys. She realizes the kids are not home and wonders what happened to them. Wandering through the woods, she searches for them, but the children are nowhere to be found. Then the protagonist will consider the possibility that they went to the square. Rachel is different from the locals in appearance. She'll be noticed and recognized immediately, so we need to find them as soon as possible. She asks the boys to wait for her. The girl runs around the market, but the children are not in the alley when they went together to sell herbs, nor on the street they strolled down. They're nowhere to be found. Eve tearfully wonders where Rachel and Zion have gone and reproaches herself for not keeping an eye on them. Runs off his feet and crashes into a man. Eve apologizes and, lifting her gaze, sees it's Noel. He asks if something happened to the girl. She replies that the children are missing. She left them at home and went out, and when she returned, they were no longer there. The main character thinks it's her fault because she only cared about money. She's an irresponsible sister. She sobs and says it's entirely her fault. Noel tries to calm the girl down, and the girl realizes that he rules now is not the time to cry. She says she'll go and find the boys. Then abruptly turns around and runs off to find the children. She mentally asks Zion and Ruby to take care of themselves until the girl finds them. At this time, a boy with white hair looking at the market asks the red cap if she is sure they have come to the right place. Rachel replies that not really, but maybe. A boy with white hair doesn't like the environment here very much and says they shouldn't be there, and then asks if it's time to go home, but Ruby takes his hand and tells him that they've come a long way to find his sister. To this, Zion replies that he is scared. A little girl tells a boy with white hair to stop whining because she hates crybabies, but the man claims his sister loves them. Ruby, on the other hand, says they're in Eve's flavor, not hers. After Red Riding Hood says Zion's sister has weird preferences, and he decides to support them, so he cries like a baby with white hair. The boy with white hair cries out that his sister is not weird. The little girl says she didn't call her weird, although to be honest, she is unusual. But Zion asks what's wrong with her preference. Ruby claims that no one in the world likes crybabies, to which you hear that at least a couple people sure do. To this, the girl replies that her older brother would never cry, and Zion tells her not to despise his sister. Ruby says she didn't think she would. The men standing nearby notice the children, and little Red Riding Hood realizes that she has acted thoughtlessly. She holds out her hand to Zion, suggesting that she get out of there. But Zion turns around and starts running away from the girl, saying he will find his sister himself. A little girl shouts to the boy with white hair to stop, because if he continues to run, he will reach the central square, and there they will be noticed. She is left with no choice, and the girl uses the power of flame to stop Zion. The one does stop, and seeing the flames says he likes it. Ruby tells the boy with white hair that he's a fool, because she never said she didn't love his sister. No matter who Eva likes, she will always be the most adored future stepsister. The little girl rejoices that the problem is solved, as she thought the best way to make the naive wolf wag his tail is fire. A man stands behind Red Riding Hood's back and repeats her last word. Ruby is surprised because a minute ago there was no one there. The stranger looks at the girl and asks if she can use fire, but the one pulling her hood over herself says he's mistaken. The wolf smiles, asking if the girl thinks she can hide her face under the handkerchief. Pointing to the flames burning near Zion, He claims that it was a little girl who created it. The boy with white hair is very scared and shaking. Ruby tells him to get behind her back. Judging by the lifeless stare, this man is dangerous. Little Red Riding Hood tells the stranger it's none of his business. She threatens the stranger with fire, telling him to stand where he stands or that fire. But the man doesn't let the girl finish her sentence. He looks at the girl's hand and claims to have seen such a ring somewhere. The boy recalls his meeting with the white-haired merchant and says that now it's clear to him why the girl turned him down. He starts laughing like crazy. The kids are startled by this. After only a moment, the stranger's face changes, and he asks how the dragon dared to venture north. The man grabs Redcap by his clothes and lifts him into the air, asking how the dragon dared to speak to him in an arrogant tone. He says he can make good money by selling the kids. Zion starts pounding the stranger with his fists and tells the creep to let Ruby go. But the man is annoyed by this, and he pushes the boy with white hair. Sion drops to the floor, hitting his head. His ears appear. The stranger notices that the child is a half-breed and says quipping that a dragon and only half-wolf make a great pair. Ruby thinks she has to protect Sion, but she can't breathe. Suddenly, a flame erupts on the man's back. He doesn't realize what's happening and lets the girl go. Noel asks with rage how this lowlife dared to touch his sister with his filthy hands. The captain approaches the children and asks if they are okay. At that time, the stranger who is attacking the children screams that he is going to die and asks for help. But Noel isn't going to help him. He ponders what to do about this annoying wolf and mashes up the idea of just finishing him off. Sion grabs the captain's hand and asks him to stop because the boy with white hair is scared. Noel apologizes to Eva's brother. The calmness and happiness in which he had been these few days had almost blinded him. The guy almost forgot who he was. The wolves are his enemies to kill. But what if it scares the white-haired lady? Just the thought of it, makes Noel's heart freeze. He puts out the fire on the stranger's back. He immediately becomes indignant and asks the guy if he wanted to kill him and how dare he attack a wolf on his own territory. The man claims that Noel will start a war because of Noel. He claims he's going after the captain right now. But suddenly, a frozen apple flies into his head. It's Eva. She's asking how that bastard could do such a thing. The girl lifts the stranger, who is unconscious from the ground, and starts shaking him. She screams and asks how dare he touch them with his filthy paws. She should have killed the guy immediately when she realized he was a drug addict. The protagonist picks up an ice cream apple off the ground and swings to hit the creep with it. But Noelle won't let her do it. Only Half-Wolf asks why he stopped her. But in response, he hears that the girl is not herself. She tries to break free and screams for him to let her finish him off. Rachel, watching this, says she no longer wants Eve to become her daughter-in-law. Sion asks why the girl decided to do that, but she says she'd like to have a wife like that herself. Noelle places her hands on the protagonist's cheeks and asks if she has calmed down. Only halfway through the wolf, however, is she beginning to realize what she's done. The captain notices that her composure has returned to her and apologizes for touching her without asking. He only wanted to help calm her down. Eve thanks the man for his help. Zion runs to his sister and asks if she's okay. The white-haired lady grabs her brother by the shoulders and asks why he left the house, and didn't she ask him to stay there while she was gone? The boy with white hair apologizes. The protagonist lived in fear that such happiness would be lost, so she tried to shield Sion from it. She tearfully asks her brother what would happen if he got hurt. Only Half-Wolf was really worried about him. The boy with white hair started apologizing and asking his little sister not to cry. Eva hugs her brother and says what a relief that nothing happened to him. Ruby calls out to the white-haired lady and says it's her fault, since the girl asked Sion to go with her. But the boy with white hair objects, saying that he was the one who insisted and asked Ruby to walk outside with him and then ran away from her. Eva hugs the boys and says you have to blame her for believing she should have left the kids alone. Rachel says it's not her fault after all it happened because she called her preference in guys weird. Sion began to cry out through tears that her preferences weren't weird, but special. Afterwards, Red Riding Hood apologizes and says that henceforth he will respect Eva's tastes, and says that he will ask his brother to cry more often. Only Half a Wolf asks those if they've said everything. Then the captain apologizes for interrupting and says that there really is an amazing preference about the main character. Then Eva says she's had enough crying and suggests we go home, but says he should first thank Noel for saving him. Cyan hugs the captain and thanks him, because without him, they would be in trouble. Rachel says thank you too and calls him brother. Noel is touched by this and offers his sister a hug. Little Red Riding Hood jumps into her brother's arms. Zion says he's hungry. Ais claims they will stop to buy groceries on the way and asks if Rachel and her brother want a certain dish. But they murmur, and Red Riding Hood's brother replies that she lost something in the alley. Eve says to go back then and asks what exactly the girl lost. Nota says she'll go with her brother since it's a secret. Noel tells the white-haired lady and Scion to get a foot in, and they catch up with them soon. Only Half a Wolf looking at them thinks it's a good thing they got along. Two dragons in an alley approach the very stranger who dared to offend the boys. The one screams that he almost died and asks what else they want from him. Rachel says that the man brought it on himself because Emo had nothing to scare her and Zion. Now it's time for him to pay for upsetting her future daughter-in-law. Ava's putting the kids to bed. The captain walks into the room and asks if she's okay. The main character says that yes, the guys have calmed down, but Noel says he didn't ask about them. He asked how Eva was doing. Only Half a Wolf doesn't realize what's going on. The man reaches up to her face. He pushes her hair back from her face and says the girl's eyes are red. She says she's fine, just really freaked out. The white-haired lady claims that what happened is her fault, but the captain says that she doesn't need to blame herself because she will take into account what happened in the future and it won't happen again. He tells Eve that she shouldn't blame herself for what the kids did, and she did well and did everything she could to protect them. Noel tells the girl that if it's okay with her, they could do it together. But the protagonist doesn't let him finish his sentence, downloads off the bed, and quickly leaves, saying she needs to gather herbs. The young man is a little surprised by this, and the lady with the silver hair goes outside and thinks that so much has happened this day. She puts her hands to her chest and thinks that she never thought something like this would happen. So the girl decides that she can't put it out of her mind that easily just yet, and she needs to bring herself to her senses before she goes home. The next day, the young lady is already sneezing. A little girl with red eyes asks if her benefactress is unwell and offers her a plaid. The main character says she feels kind of sick. The girl can't believe that a little night out resulted in a cold. She covers herself with a plaid and thinks that she's lived in the north for so long and just managed to get sick. And after all, even little white-haired Zion didn't catch a cold. The boy with white hair tells his sister not to die, and the girl says it's okay. A young man with black hair approaches Eve and asks her to forgive him. He states that the young lady has a high fever and needs to take medicine, whereupon the guy points to the herbs and says they're good for the common cold, so he'll boil them up for the girl. The protagonist thanks him and apologizes for inconveniencing him again, but the young man tells her not to worry and claims he'll be back soon. Scion offers his help, and the girl with black hair says that he can't use fire, so let him leave it to her. The protagonist is watching all this from the bed. The guy at this time asks what herbs exactly to take, but the young lady slowly sinks into sleep. A little while later, someone wakes her from her sleep. It turns out to be a guy with black hair. He brings a mug and says it's medicine, so the girl should just take it and rest. The young lady rises heavily from the bed and says her head is splitting. The guy hands her a glass and says he has made a potion of herbs, so let Eve drink it, for it will make eating easier. The main character does, but notices that this tea has a slightly bitter taste. The young man with black hair, on the other hand, tucks her into bed and suggests she sleep. He also says that he will leave the rest of the potion on the table. So when the young lady wakes up, let her have another drink. He then says that he will go outside with the children, and they will draw water and come back soon. The girl Gemini realizes whether it's because of weakness or not, but when a guy's hands touch her, it feels like she's suspended between heaven and hell. The young lady thinks about how warm she is. She fell asleep immediately and had no idea what was going on around her. But when she opened her eyes, her body felt a little strange. The girl thought about whether they had found water, but suddenly she noticed that her arm looked a little strange, and the tail appeared. So the realization comes to the protagonist that she has turned into a she-wolf. The young lady can't believe it because she slept for so many hours as if not alive, and woke up in the form of an animal. The main character hopes that it must be a dream, and she is still asleep, and what is happening is part of her fantasy. Eva decides to just calm down, close her eyes, and count to 10, because maybe then things will go back to normal. The young lady starts the countdown, but after a few figures, she falls into despair and realizes that it's not a dream after all, and she's just trying to deny reality. Eve doesn't realize what's going on, but then he smells a slightly familiar odor, and when he looks at the table, he sees a cup of blue potion there. Now the young lady realizes that even though she has a stuffy nose due to a cold, she can still smell the disgusting odor. And the girl remembers asking the young man to make a decoction from the herbs in the basket. Well, those herbs have no side effects, and the guy apparently added something else. Then the protagonist climbs up on the table and sees those very blue herbs. The young lady remembers who gave them to her. She wonders why the guy gave them away they kept them. She thinks it's no surprise then that she's turned. Although in the story itself this never happened, so the girl wonders what she should do to get back into human form. After all, if she doesn't get it right before this family arrives, who's going to be in trouble? The young lady is already imagining them burning her alive and thinks she's screwed. But the girl decides to stay calm and realizes that, first of all, she has to get out of there. So the she-wolf heads for the door and tries to push the door open. She thinks she'll regain her human form when the effects of the drug wear off. But no matter how hard the main character tries, she still can't open the door because instead of hands, she has paws. But then the door suddenly swings open, and the young lady thinks she's finally made it. But all that comes into the room is Rachel. She tells Zion that Eve is probably asleep, and when someone is sick, it's important to give them a chance to rest properly. The main character, on the other hand, realizes that she is finished, and when Rachel looks at her, then the young lady thinks that judging by the look on her face, the girl has realized who she is. She also sees her brother, but the boy with white hair only says it's magical, and the protagonist realizes that he doesn't seem to have figured it out. They had lived deep in the woods since he was born, so the boy had never seen other wolves, nor had Eve shown what they were like. But then the boy with white hair says the ears and tail look familiar. The young lady, however, begs not to be recognized. That boy with the white hair says the wolf looks like his, but Rachel quickly shuts him up and says the creature looks like a dog. The girl claims she saw it once, and it was definitely a dog. The boy with the white hair only wonders where the lady with the black hair saw her, and if her memory has returned. The protagonist only wonders why Zion has suddenly gotten wise today, while the boy with white hair says he should show the doggy to his sister. But when they look at the bed, the sister is not there. So the young man begins to ponder. He says the sister disappeared and the dog showed up. The protagonist in her thoughts asks him not to think of anything, because now is not the time for thinking. The girl realizes that her brother only turns on his brain when it's not required. And the boy with white hair adds that his sister has something to do with the doggy. But the she-wolf immediately falls to the ground and starts rolling around on the floor to be petted. She understands the need for distraction. And this method works, because the guy immediately runs up to the she-wolf and starts stroking her. Rachel is a little shocked, but she does sigh and says it's undoubtedly a dog. The protagonist thinks it hurts her to hear herself called that. The girl, on the other hand, says that sister must have left and has a fever, so Eve must have wanted to cool off. The guy just shows the she-wolf's paws and says they look like marshmallows. Eva thinks he would pity and sympathize with his sister who has to pretend to be a dog. They play with her. The lady with the black hair adds that none of that matters and calls the young man a fool. She asks what happens if her brother suddenly returns. The protagonist is a little scared because of this wolf woman, realizes that because of them, she almost forgot about her hopeless situation, because the final boss is about to appear. And then that final boss walks into the room. Everyone but Sion stares at him in shock. The guy asks why the creature is there. The protagonist can't think of anything better to do than just bark, and she realizes she's screwed. The she-wolf wonders if she should act nice, but immediately realizes that this trick won't work on him, because this young man is not as easy to fool as children. So the creature with white fur closes her eyes and thinks about how she should be. But suddenly, Rachel grabs her and says it's just a doggy. The guy asks what she's talking about. The little girl, on the other hand, says she will raise this doggy, so let her brother not hurt her, for she knows a lot of cute moves. The young lady says that if he wants her to live with him, then let him be attentive to the dog, because it is not easy at all. A young man with black hair turns to Rachel, and he thinks about why she's acting like this, since it's the first time. But then the whole situation seems strange to him. He wonders where Eve has gone, and then he looks at the table and sees the herbs scattered there. The bed is also disassembled, as if the girl jumped up and hurriedly ran away. And also this dog suddenly appeared. So a sudden realization comes to the guy that maybe this doggy is Eve. The protagonist realizes that Noel is in a foul mood. If nothing is done, he will explode with rage. The she-wolf is already imagining the whole picture and wondering if it's okay to scare children with fire. So she decides to escape Rachel's embrace and realizes she must prevent disaster at all costs. So she moves closer to the young man. He looks a little gloomy, but the protagonist doesn't stop. She puts her paw on his shoe and in her mind asks him to forgive her this time and asks if she isn't cute. But the guy has almost no reaction to this, so the she-wolf thinks that obviously this isn't going to work and she'll have to accept doom. And the worst part is that she will fall into eternal sleep in the guise of a dog. Or rather a she-wolf. But Noel just says she's adorable. The young lady doesn't know what he means, and the guy just bends over and says he understands Rachel. He claims the eye color and coat are the most beautiful he's ever seen. The young man smiles, and the protagonist realizes his mood has changed dramatically and wonders if she has succeeded. All the guy does is pet the she-wolf and tell her she's a special dog. The young lady isn't thrilled about it, but thinks if a guy honors her, she doesn't mind acting nice. The young man only smiles and thinks she doesn't need to try so hard to pretend. But then he gets up and says he's going to go gather firewood. Rachel asks what about the puppy. Noel tells the girl to take care of him since the doggy is clearly confused. The young lady only hugs the creature harder and then asks when her brother will return. The guy claims he can't get it done fast enough and he'll walk some more. He states that it seems Eve has gone for a walk, so Noel tells the kids to watch the house until he gets there, and then leaves, closing the door behind him. But as soon as he does, he immediately sits on the threshold. The guy realizes that he barely restrained himself from attacking her, and thinks that he didn't even know that the girl is a wolf. If Rachel hadn't stopped him, he would have destroyed the she-wolf in an instant. The young man wonders what he should do now. For this rage and unacknowledged power clouds his mind, driving him mad. Rachel, meanwhile, sighs. She picks up the doggy and offers to go get ready for bed. Sion asks why he is in such a hurry because he wants to play with the puppy. But the young lady says that the doggy needs to sleep too. The boy with the white hair gets a little disappointed, and Rachel realizes that this way both her and her sister will have time to return to their real appearance in a quieter environment. Afterward, she settles the she-wolf down and says it's time to dream. The protagonist is very grateful to the little girl. Eve licks her and thinks that if the girl hadn't stopped Noel, she wouldn't have survived. The young lady thanks the little girl in her thoughts. But the she-wolf still doesn't understand what she must do to return to human form, for she has cooled Noel's ardor. But if she can't get back to her old form, it will be very bad. The girl realizes it's all because of the drugs and her eyes close on their own. The young lady thinks that maybe she shouldn't push herself and give herself some time to heal. When the babies fall asleep, she turns back, and her last thought before going to sleep was what a rough day it had been. A little while later, Noel comes into the room. He sees this sleeping trio and thinks Eve is human again. The guy opens it up and thinks that the young lady must have been pretty panicked to see that she had turned into a wolf. Though in a very cute way, he sits down in a chair by the bed and wonders how the girl will react to finding out he's in the know. Noel ponders whether she will flee. The guy realizes that first, to get to know the girl better, he used Rachel as an excuse to make contact with her. But he realizes that if this lady were the wolf from the legend, then he would have to take her heart to keep his life. But since he was in love with her and decided to stay by her side forever, all the emotions that were hidden deep in his heart began to show. The guy realizes that he doesn't want to hurt Eve and wants to be with her forever. But it takes some doing to get Eve to choose him. Suddenly, the girl through her sleep says how cold she is. The guy puts his hand to her face and thinks he has to be someone she likes first. He thinks that if he himself could control his powers, he would use them to warm the girl. The protagonist almost wakes up from the touch, and the guy pulls his hand away. But the young lady only says she's warm, and then grasps the young man's hand and pulls him closer through his sleep, after which he's already hovering over her. The young man realizes that his only heart beats for her. He is confused and realizes that it is floating like the moon in the sky, then flying down to the ground. In that awkward moment, he turned to the God he had never believed in. The guy asks him to let Eva's choice fall on him, so the girl will love him as much as he loves her. In the morning, the main character wakes up and thinks that the weather is warmer this day, but then she remembers that she is in the north, and there is no warm weather, so the girl immediately gets out of bed. But on her feet, she sees Noel, who is also holding her hand. The young lady is a little confused and wonders why a young man with black hair is holding her hand in her sleep. And did he really spend all night like that for fear she'd catch another cold? Then the protagonist gets a little scared. After all, she's thinking about whether he saw her ears and tail. The girl is already imagining the worst-case scenarios. She thinks that the young man will tie her up and interrogate her when she wakes up. The young lady doesn't understand how she should run away. But then Noel wakes up. Eva only wishes him good morning. Well, then the guy grabs her hand harder and asks if it's cold yet. The main character asks a little confused what he's talking about, and the guy only has a genuine smile on his face. Says that last night, Ava went for a walk last night, so her temperature dropped. The young lady only thinks he's saying that, and then remembers that Noel thinks she went for a walk yesterday, and then cries out that he's right. The girl claims she took such a long walk that she almost froze, and then cringes at whether she held his hand all night. The young lady releases his hand and apologizes for causing trouble. The guy just thinks how cute she is, and a little while later he's on his way to do business. The main character asks if Rachel's memory has returned, and if she will go home with her brother. But the little girl says with a sad expression on her face that she doesn't remember anything. Then the protagonist strokes her head and tells her that she'll have to stick around with them then. Then the young lady turns to Noel and apologizes again for holding his hand for so long. The guy says it's no big deal, and Eve adds that he probably didn't sleep well because of it, and says that if he suddenly needs help, he can say, "The girl claims she'll do anything." The guy asks if it's true, and the young lady replies that she will do her best. Then the young man bends over a little and says if she wouldn't mind stroking his hair. Rachel is shocked to see her brother spring into action. She wonders why Noel is being so assertive today. The girl doesn't know what he's up to, but decides to help. She says with a smile on her face that Zion calls her, so she'll probably go. The protagonist thinks how awkward it is to be alone with this young man. But the guy only turns to Eve and says that the whole time he was holding her hand, he was getting a little colder. The young lady thinks she's been passed over and asks if they should hold hands then. The guy claims it's a good idea, but if she touches his hair, it's much better. He also, with a sad expression on his face, asks, would it be unpleasant for a girl to pet him? Eva blushes at this. She thinks what an attractive expression the guy has on his face. The young man says he realizes how much he's asking for, but he just can't forget that cool moment when they were together. The protagonist only shrieks and tells him to stop doing weird things because they were just holding hands, and because children can misunderstand them if they hear them. But the young lady agrees and puts her hand on his head after all. The guy blushes slightly at this, and Eva's heart starts to beat more frequently. The girl realizes that the she-wolf is now stroking the dragon captain while her heart beats faster and faster. The young lady thinks she must look silly. A few days later, she turns to the children and tells them to keep their capes on while they are in the square. The kids agree, and then they head to the market. The protagonist is choosing what to buy. It seems to the girl that in her absence, something happened to the children at home. so she decided to take them out for a walk on the condition that they will not leave her side. Suddenly, Zion turns to his sister. He points to one of the stores and suggests that they go there together. The main character asks if he wants to go to the bookstore. She was wondering if she should buy a couple of books about the human world, because she'd been wanting to do that for a long time. The girl agrees, but tells the guys to be quiet. Afterward, they go into a bookstore. The young lady realizes that the kids are thrilled. The feet also have to be watched to make sure they don't take the capes off. Suddenly, the girl sees one book. She realizes it's a love novel for adults. The girl remembers that before she was born, she also read a novel, and the main character liked to shed tears in front of her lover. The young lady wonders if she should buy it, since she has a lot of free time and money now. The protagonist, with a smile, thinks she is an adult so she can afford it. But suddenly, her gaze falls on an empty shelf, and the protagonist realizes that there are no books about the human world there. So she goes up to the salesman and says she can't see any books about the human world anywhere, and then asks if they're all sold out. But the man only asks if she didn't know they were banned long ago. The young lady is shocked at this news, and the salesman goes on and says that it's all because of the massive and illegal migration into the human world. Their king was very angry, so these books were withdrawn from sale until the situation got worse. The man says there's nothing he can do, and the protagonist realizes she ended up buying a book that didn't interest her all that much, and if they're stuck up north for the rest of their lives, what's in it for her? Rachel, on the other hand, looks at her sister and then goes into her room in the evening. The girl uses her firepower and thinks that she definitely heard what Eve said about the human world, right? The little girl wonders if the girl wants to move there, but because if she does, they will never be able to see each other again. A little girl creates a bird using her powers and realizes that Eve must be thwarted at all costs. The little girl tells the bird that she has a request, whereupon she points to the book her sister bought this morning. The girl realizes that since the young lady hasn't told anyone about her, that means this book has something to do with her plans to move, and the little girl needs to know what she's thinking. But when she unwraps this book, she realizes it's a love story for adults. Suddenly turning one of the pages, she comes across something that confuses her, whereupon Rachel flips through some more pages, and then holds out the book to the phoenix and tells him to fill in this passage and then hand it to his brother. The girl also states that it must be done now. The bird immediately obeys her and flies away. Then she flies into her brother's estate and tells him all about it. The guy is only a little shaken by such news. He asks embarrassedly if Eve really has such a preference. A little while later, he's already sitting down with a book. The young man realized that since he intended to please Eve, he had to make every effort to be an attractive crybaby. So Noel read 10 stories that will bring you to tears. The guy cringes at what else to do to burst into tears. He realizes there's no point in reading a bunch of sad stories. But then his gaze falls on the bird in the window. The young man realizes it's Phoenix Rachel, so he lets it fly inside. The bird then shows the message of its mistress. Rachel said the guy should immediately find out what type of guy Eve is. And after the bird shows him what Rachel asked for, the guy is shocked. He now realizes who Ava likes. Noel realizes he has nothing in common with the ideal girl, but thinks now is not the time to learn to cry. Better to go and check with Eva herself. One of the servants asks his master to wait, for it is night. But the protagonist only claims he's heading north. The servant asks if he is doing it again. Believe the gentleman has only recently returned from there. The boy cries out that the young man with black hair can't go because he knows that he has an important meeting tomorrow. But the young man only claims that he will be back soon, and then turns into a dragon and flies away. The servant is shocked and cries out what has appeared in the north since his master flies there almost every day. At this time, Rachel and Zion are playing outside. They call their sister to go play together. The girl refuses and says not to think about her and just enjoy the game. The young lady realizes that she should have taken them outside for a walk earlier, as the boys are having a lot of fun. The protagonist sighs and thinks she's even envious, although she had a good time reading a novel last night, too. Completely lost track of time. Eve realized that this was the first time she had read such a novel since her rebirth. But at some point in the moment, the young lady came to a standstill. She read the line in which I said that he had been tormented all night by the flames raging in his chest, so the guy had come all this way to come to the young lady. The protagonist is already reading with shaking hands that the young man had bronzed skin and an attractive appearance. Then Eve thinks, what the hell? Because this is totally not her type. The girl hasn't read a captive romance story in a long time, so it's her own fault since she didn't check the content beforehand. The young lady thinks that it's not that she doesn't like big guys, but she'd rather have the one who's better at evoking compassion in her, and if he's also handsome, she'll get 100 extra points. The girl likes guys with thin, long fingers, but in moderation, her ideal should be with dark hair and light skin color, and also with a gentle smile. If the young lady could choose, it would be someone like Noel, but the girl is confused and wonders what is wrong with her, and then decides to leave such thoughts behind. But suddenly there is a noise from behind, and the protagonist wonders what happened. And when he turns around, he sees Noel. Then the girl asks if they have an appointment for today. The young man replies that he doesn't, and then thinks that if his memory doesn't fail him, Zion said that Eve liked crybabies handsome. However, Rachel showed a completely opposite image yesterday, according to this guy wondering who she really likes. But he thinks it's worth a try after all, and then quotes one of the lines of this novel. Noel claims he was tormented all night by the flames raging in his chest, so he came all this way to come to the young lady. The protagonist is confused and asks what he's talking about, and wonders what happened to him, but then remembers that his words are exactly the same as Gianna's line. And the lady with the white hair wonders if it could be a coincidence, or maybe the guy had a fever. The young man, however, approaches Eve and asks her to cool him down. The protagonist realizes that the relationship is unlikely to work out because she is a she-wolf. Zion, on the other hand, holds out the rope from the mine shaft and says it's Ruby's turn, but the girl only looks at the two men. The boy with white hair asks if Ruby can hear him at all. The lady with the black hair shrieks with a whisper that after all she has shown how to behave to win her heart and ask what her brother is doing. After that, she cries out louder that if it doesn't work, he should at least make the skin darker like that guy's. She cringes that she gave him the perfect lead, but the guy still messed up, and it's a total disappointment. And the girl's thoughts add that if her brother can't handle it, Eve will become her wife. Zion only whimpers and says that Rachel doesn't listen to him. Then he turns around and says he doesn't want to play with her anymore and leaves. The young man realizes that sometimes the girl says things he can't understand. He certainly wants to play with Rachel. And the girl had played with him before, but now he almost cries, realizing that the young lady isn't even paying attention to him. But then he drives such thoughts away from him and thinks that he can amuse himself. He goes a little further and says he doesn't care about Rachel anymore, and then let her not even ask to play together. But then under his feet, he sees a glass container with a crystal in it. The young man immediately bends down to it and thinks how beautiful this jar is, and hides behind a tree on the acquaintance. At this time, Noel is still asking Eve to cool it, but the girl only covers his collar and thinks he can't. The main character says that no matter how comfortable he is right now, but you can't trust unbuttoning your shirt like that. The young man only sighs as he realizes that Hyena's style doesn't suit him at all, so Eve won't like him. But then the girl puts her hand to his face and says that last time, didn't he say he felt so much better when she stroked him? Noel realizes that he was so jealous of the kids last time that he said something without thinking, but the guy realizes that the young lady still remembers. The protagonist, however, asks if it's better this way, and the guy thinks that to win the heart of such a tender girl, he should try his best and learn more about her ideal type. The young man says he really likes those touches, but thinks it's terribly awkward. A little while later, the young lady removes her hand and asks if Noel is okay now. The young man says with a smile that, yes, and thanks her. The main character reaches for his shirt. She says the guy is missing one button and offers her help. The girl asks why he suddenly decided to unbutton, and also his face is all red. The guy gets even more embarrassed and says the weather is just too hot, so he couldn't take it. The young man considers whether that was rude, then covers his face with his hand and apologizes. He claims he'll be more careful next time, and if Eve doesn't like blushing in embarrassment, he's caught covering it up. The main character does not even understand how to be because she first met her ideal. But he is a dragon. At this time, Zion picks up a bottle from the floor. He realizes that this stone is very beautiful and looks like Ruby's eyes, and it's also warm. So the boy with white hair decides that this stone can be taken home, but suddenly someone approaches the young man and is greeted. The boy with white hair asks who the man is, and the boy with green hair replies that he's not a bad man. Zion, on the other hand, thinks he has a strange smile. He remembers that sister once said to be careful of those with too narrow eyes. So the young man says that the sister told him not to socialize with strangers. The guy with the green hair and thinks that, of course, this guy would be hard to fool, but fooling vigilant kids is his specialty. So the guy takes off his hood, and the boy with white hair is surprised by this, for this young man's hair changes its color to white. Zion marvels at this and says that the man's hair color has changed. The stranger asks if it's cool and says it's his ability, since he is a chameleon. The boy with white hair asks in shock what it is. A man changes the color of his hands and says they can change their color at any time. Then he thinks the boy with white hair has already been defeated. And now we can cut to the chase. The stranger asks what the young man is holding in his hand. Zion says he picked it up by accident, and that bottle looks warm. The stranger asks if it is true, and if the boy with white hair will then give it to his sister. Zion, on the other hand, remembers his sister and looks sadly at the pebble. The man thinks it won't be long before the boy with white hair submits to him completely. He claims he knows a place full of these things. But the baby with white hair only begins to cry. The stranger cries out in shock as to why he is crying. He certainly didn't expect this, and the little guy with white hair claims that his sister really likes Ruby. The man asks who it is, and the little one with white hair says Nurse said Ruby is so warm you can cuddle with her every day, whereas he's just a cold little boy with white hair. The guy wonders if he has this thing, if his sister will hug him. He tearfully says that his sister doesn't love him anymore, and that's not going to be changed by some pebble. The guy with green hair in shock asks Togo not to be sad. He even tears himself from such a thing because he cannot look at other people's tears. The stranger with tears in his eyes cries out that you should not think only of bad things, because Sister Boy with white hair cannot help but love him. The little kid with white hair also cries out in tears that his sister likes Ruby better. The man says that Sister Boy with white hair loves him very much, and the little boy with white hair will figure it out for himself when he grows up. But Zion only asks what he should do now. Then the stranger tells the man to remember that if you love someone, just show it to them so you won't regret it one day. After all this, the protagonist's brother blows his nose into a handkerchief, and the stranger tells him not to hate his sister. After all, she may not show it, but deep down she loves the boy with white hair very much. Zion says he understands. He also thanks the stranger and states that he feels much better now. The guy with the green hair says it's glorious. And then he claims that the pebble is warm, and he is sure that his sister will be incredibly happy when the boy with white hair gives it to her, and then all his worries will disappear at once, although it may hurt the baby a little bit. The guy with green hair realizes that it's time to get back to work and finish the task, because if the boy with white hair bites, it will be easier for him to get closer and then end the girl, which is his goal. Colleagues asked Chameleon to take care of it. But suddenly he hears someone else's voice. It turns out to be Rachel. The girl asks why the man is there, and then asks Zion why he left without saying anything, since he was the reason the young lady couldn't watch her sister with her brother. The girl realized that the atmosphere between them was getting better, and it seemed her sister had fallen in love with the young man's shyness. So the young lady was telling Zion that his sister's ideal type was not hyena. But when she turned around, the boy with white hair was gone. The girl was already almost gargling with rage. She said that letting the boy with the white hair help nothing. But how could one leave in silence? Now Rachel shrieks that it comes out while she was running around looking for Zion, that he's just having fun with someone he's seeing for the first time. The boy with the white hair says it's not like that, but the young lady only advises the stranger to come up with a good explanation before approaching her. Then the boy with the white hair immediately goes to Rachel, and the boy with the green hair thinks what a traitor he is. The young lady then asks Sion who the man is, and then looks at the stranger and tells the man to tell her everything he knows. The guy thinks that until he went there, everyone was on pins and needles. For now, not only was the young mistress missing, but the captain had not returned from the north. One of the servants claimed that he felt as if their master was secretly breeding a pet there. His co-workers asked what he was talking about and if he was sure of what he was saying. The young man says that of course he would never assert anything without proof. But not only does he visit there often, he also buys up mountains of love novels. The guy with green hair wasn't even listening to what the conversation was about. But then someone called out his name and told him to head north. The young man with green hair only asks who's knocking while he's asleep. But he is immediately hit on the head with a scroll. His colleague shrieks that he told him not to sleep during the meeting. He says that the next time the captain goes north, then have the green-haired guy secretly follow him. The guy asks what he has to do it for, but his colleague merely holds out a jar of gemstone and tells Chameleon to try to get together with a man who is close to the captain and use the gemstone. After all, this stone purified by the captain's inner power, and for an ordinary person it can be very dangerous, but they are able to withstand more than an ordinary person. He also adds that more power has been added to this stone to increase the pernicious effect, and the green-haired guy should remember that he should never let young Mistress Rachel touch this stone, as its fire attribute is similar to her flame. If the woman the captain met is worthy of being his life partner. Then touching the stone, she absorbs all its power into her body, but the guy with the green hair asks, suddenly touched by a simple one. His co-worker replies that obviously then she can't match him and will burn to the ground. Now the guy with the white hair thinks the girl will be really pissed off by this, but only apologizes. And then says there was no other choice since she and the captain had been away for a long time. Rachel realizes that these scumbags are using her brother's power to test Eve. Her sister has been very kind to her, and the girl doesn't want to put her at risk. So the young lady turns to Zion and says to give her the stone, because it is a very dangerous thing, and it is better to keep it with her. The boy with white hair extends the stone into her hands, and Carmel is already grabbing his head. He realizes that the young lady must not touch the stone, and if the fire attribute collides with her flames. The young mistress is in danger, so he snatches the stone from her hands. The girl asks what he is doing, and orders the thing to be returned. The guy with the green hair wonders if the young lady will take him away like that. The girl only cries out for him to give it back, and the stranger thinks that if things continue like this, sooner or later she will have it, and the only solution is to swallow it. So the guy thinks he can handle it and immediately throws this rock in his mouth. Rachel cries out that he's an idiot and let him spit it out, but the green-haired guy only pulls back. Rachel once again tells him to spit it out, but he doesn't agree because it's more dangerous if the girl has it. Then the little girl uses her firepower and says that if he doesn't spit it out, she'll have to resort to force. But then the stranger swallows this stone and sighs. Rachel asks if he was going crazy. I mean, if the guy swallowed it, that's too bad. Black energy begins to come out of Chameleon's mouth. He turns to the young mistress and asks her to help him. Rachel only takes a step back. She thinks how creepy it is. And since the stranger swallowed the stone with her brother's power, she's about to pass away. Fear, which the young lady had forgotten, reignites in her this nightmare reminiscent of the old days in the north. The little girl realizes that she is very scared and doesn't want it to end. But suddenly someone puts his hand on hers. It turns out to be Zion. The boy with white hair tells Rachel not to be afraid. After all, he will protect her. The young lady realizes that the baby with white hair is trembling with fear, but tries to keep her safe anyway. So the girl tries to calm down and realizes that if she gives in to fear, Zion will also be in danger. So she tells the boy with white hair to get behind her and uses the power of fire. She tells Carmel that it will hurt. But suddenly someone flies past the two of them right at Chameleon's head. Carmel comes to her senses and wonders what that was all about. But when she looks under her feet, there is a frozen rock. The girl says that someone is trying to ruin their peaceful life, and for that, he even traveled such a long way deep into the forest. Eva cries out for the stranger not to dare touch her children and asks how dare he do so. And who the hell does he think he is? Noel comes up behind him too. He's a little worried about Eve. The girl only shrieks that she will show the stranger who she has run into. Rachel cherishes hugging her sister and says it's dangerous. But then the protagonist realizes that her body is unusually hot, and when the guy grabs her hand, then some dark energy passes to her. Noel runs up to the lady with white hair. He asks if Eve is okay. The girl says she is, and only her clothes are a little scorched. The young man with black hair asks what the hell Carmel is doing there, and then claims that, judging by his condition, he ate a red rock. Rachel says she thought they were in danger, so she used force. And Noel asks why he's there, and the protagonist asks if the young man with black hair knows him. The guy claims that it must have been the stone with his power, because looking at Chameleon's condition, it's clear that there was a lot of it there. And if nothing is done, Carmel's life will be in jeopardy. But Noel clenches his fists and doesn't realize what he can do. At this time, the main character runs up to that guy and starts using her power on him. A young man with black hair cries out that it's dangerous. But the young lady claims she can't let him die. Her magic will take the heat out of him, so it's worth a try. The girl struggles to make it, and Noel wonders how it's possible. A little while later, Carmel is already waking up in bed. He turns around, or doesn't realize where he is. The guy wonders if he's dead, but suddenly someone comes into the room and says that the stranger is finally awake. That turns out to be the main character asking if everything's okay. The guy's a little shocked by this, and the young lady walks up to him and puts her hand on his forehead, then claims there is no fever. The guy is a little embarrassed and wonders if it's an angel. Eve holds out the medicine to him and offers him a drink, for it will spend the remaining warmth. The guy with green hair thanks her, and then concludes that he is in paradise, because there are no bosses or work problems there. But then he hears some other voice telling Eve that he brought that plant. Carmel wonders if this angel's name is Eve. But then he sees his boss there and is surprised. The young man asks if Eve has talked about this plant. The protagonist is surprised and says it's the best and she'll go make a decoction. Carmel at the thoughts asks the angel not to leave. Well, the girl leaves the room, and the chameleon is approached by his boss. Noel says she now wishes to hear his excuses. The guy with the green hair immediately gets on his knees and begs for forgiveness, because all they wanted was to get the captain back. The guy claims he won't be blamed for it, and is well aware that the guy with the green hair was worried about him, so he did it. He puts his hand on his shoulder and says the main problem is that Eva and the kids almost got hurt. Carmel immediately smacks his forehead on the floor and cries out that he is sorry and is willing to atone for his sin with his life. But then the main character walks into the room. She asks why. Noel, on the other hand, realizes that he needs to put on a good show. He can't let what happened ruin everything, and while he may not be her perfect crew, it's at least worth hiding his flaws. So the young man puts a hand on the chameleon's head and cries out that his fever is rising again, so he'd better lie back down. Carmel is in shock, not realizing what happened until his young man with black hair lifts him up and says he will bring a bag of ice. A little while later, the guy with green hair is already sitting with a mug of medicine and a bag of ice. He doesn't understand what happened to his boss. After all, the young man with black hair seems to be faking it. But Carmel remembers that this girl saved him. However, ice magic is an ability of wolves, and so he asks if the girl then used magic to lower the fever. The protagonist replies that that's just the way it was. Carmel then asks if the young lady is a wolf. The main character wonders why this happens every time she meets someone from the South. The young lady only smiles awkwardly and tries to justify herself, but suddenly someone enters the room and calls for her brother. It turns out to be Zion. The boy with white hair asks if the boy with green hair is okay, because he was very surprised when the boy fell down. Carmel claims he's fine, and the young lady thinks her little brother got there just in time. Rachel is smiling from behind at this time. The girl turns to her sister and asks for a hug, because she is hot. Eve holds out her hands and asks if it's true. Noel smiles at this, And Rachel thinks that since her brother can't do it himself, she'll help, and enough of this nonsense. The protagonist asks if Rachel is better. The little girl replies that she's fine, and calls her brother over to her. She claims that her brother is hot too, and offers to hug everyone together. Eva gets a little embarrassed and asks if the little girl likes to cuddle. The young lady replies that yes, she does. Carmel only observes them and then asks the boy with white hair what the relationship between them is. The protagonist says that circumstances brought them together and there is no relationship. Rachel only hugs the girl and tells her that she is her sister, while she herself looks at the chameleon with a smile, and then claims that the girl is also a friend of the brother. The main character is in shock, wondering what the little girl said and if she got it exactly right. The girl is already imagining the place with Noel, but then she tries to push those thoughts away from her and realizes that she seems to have misheard. There must be something between them to call her a friend, but there's nothing. Ava tries to pull herself together and think hard about the connection. Maybe the little girl meant friendship. And yet there are cultural differences between North and South, and yet the word troops can have different meanings depending on the nationality of the speaker. For example, in the West, tigers eat grass. The girl takes the baby in her arms and thinks that it can't be otherwise, and she has to explain everything clearly to Rachel. Then Scion only asks if his sister is now Noel's friend, for if so, he can call the chameleon his friend. He then hugs the guy and tells him he's his new friend. Carmel laughs a little awkwardly, and then says that judging by the way their young mistress treats them, who these guys are can't be wolves. He then asks to be forgiven for the disrespectful question. The young lady looks at the brunette and wonders why he is not surprised at all, and when their eyes meet, the young man looks away in embarrassment. The protagonist realizes that looking at him, and you can't tell anything, is wrong, so she wonders how to understand what she called her friend. Rachel only looks at the young lady and asks for another hug. Ava then thinks that it's just a baby after all, and there's no way she would put that meaning into the word. So she'll have to ask Noel later. A little while later, Eve asks if it's time for Carmel to go back. The guys reply that yes, and he's feeling much better, so he doesn't want to inconvenience them anymore. Then the girl offers him to have dinner with them and then leave afterward, because the guy must be hungry. Carmel only says it's no big deal and he'll buy food on the way home, after which they say goodbye to the chameleon. Eve tells him to take care, and next time if he passes by, have him grab it. But then the young lady thinks that maybe there won't be a next time because of such a short time she's met at Southern. Still, she wonders if the word friend means the same thing in the South as it does in the North. So she turns to Noel and says she's interested in something. The girl then asks, is it possible that Southerners and Northerners use the same words to mean different things? For example, the word girlfriend. The guy only looks at her and says he's down south, but then asks where Rachel went. The main character notices this too and asks where she is. Then Noel says he'll go look for her, and he thinks the girl is seeing Carmel off. The young lady says she'll go around the neighborhood then. The girl thinks that he never answered after all, and it's safe to assume the word doesn't mean much, so she decides to ask. Carmel, on the other hand, is walking through the woods. He says it's suspicious that the captain now has a girlfriend. The guy with green hair immediately realizes that, in other words, this girl is his future life partner, and that's about to change. The guy realizes he has to go back and tell the people of the South about it as soon as possible, for they must know that their captain is about to bring his life partner and her brother to the South. But suddenly Phoenix Rachel flies up to him. The guy realizes it's Mistress's bird, and when he turns around, he sees the boss and his sister behind him. Then the lad asks the captain if that benefactress is his future companion. The guy with the green hair says he's going to come home but his boss interrupts and asks what Carmel thinks of Eve's power. The guy claims she has the most powerful ice magic he's ever seen, and then cries out that this is why they should bring her to the South as soon as possible so the girl can help them. But Noel just tells him to calm down and to make some preparations first. He tells the lad to imagine, for a dragon suddenly appears in the north and forces its inhabitants to go with him to the south, what he thinks these fellows will do, and perhaps they will flee from fear. The guy with green hair says he'll talk to their people so that the benefactors and her brother will be given a proper welcome. Rachel says it's the right thing to do, And her brother adds that there's another point. After all, what would the Southerners think if Eve and her brother were introduced as mages from the North? Perhaps they will be mistaken for wolves, as mages often are. Then the guy with the green hair realizes the situation and says he means to explain to them that these guys are not wolves to avoid misunderstandings. Noel says that's exactly what's needed, and the guy is very savvy. So he trusts Carmel completely with this assignment. The young man with black hair states that it will be very difficult, but he should be able to cope. Then asks if the guy can do it. The guy with green hair says he'll try his best to make sure no one thinks the benefactor and her brother are wolves. Noel says that's good, and he's counting on Carmel. Then he goes to the estate. His co-worker asks if the guy has met someone who can control the captain's inner fire. The guy with green hair replies that it's true and he's seen it himself, and also the girl lives up north. The man says it is very strange and hard to believe that there is a lot of ice that he has never met. Afterward, he asks Carmel where the girl lives, since he has to check things out for himself. And to find out if it's really a person, a guy with green hair asks what this is about and if the man is now going to head north. But all he hears in response is yes, because if you don't look at the situation, it seems very strange. It is hard for a man to believe that there is a mosh of ice he has never met. One day, the flames engulfed the South, and sadness engulfed everyone. On the day the previous lord and his wife were killed by the current lord's uncontrollable power, he swore to himself that he would do anything for their lord and young mistress. To help him, he gathered the greatest ice mages from around the world, and even went to secretly conspire with the half-breed wolf, but it was all in vain. And now suddenly there was a mage capable of controlling the Lord's power. The boy realizes that this must be a ploy by the vile wolves, for the legend said so. The servant realizes that he has a duty to protect their master. A little while later, the protagonist walks into a bookstore. She asks if there is anything suitable. The young lady replies that she usually buys her books at this place, and there is a large selection. The girl says it would be great if the kids had good children's books. Noel says she thinks so too. But Eva says that since they have reduced its assortment, she can't even find anything for herself. When a guy asks what she's looking for, and the young lady replies that she is looking for books about the human world, and she wants to understand if the ones that will help get there. Then the girl thinks it would be a good idea to learn how to pretend to be human. The protagonist asks if there are many such books in the South, and then whispers that since he's the head of the South, he must have a private library. The young man says with a smile on his face that he's not sure since he's never asked about her. Then the girl asks if it happens that in the North-South, the same word has a different meaning depending on the situation. The guy asks what she's talking about, and the main character is talking about the word girlfriend again. She says they have it applied to her brother's wife. And when Rachel calls her that, he and Carmel don't react. The guy just keeps quiet about the main character, then says he shouldn't have asked because it's obvious. But Noel only turns to Eve and is a little confused to say that the word girlfriend practically means that. Then the protagonist is a little surprised and cringes at what he's talking about. The girl ponders if she thought right after all and doesn't understand why Rachel called her that. The little girl is only quietly eating her meal, and Eve continues her musings. She wonders why no one has reacted to this, but then she sighs heavily. Noel says he's sorry the girl is in such an awkward situation, and it was worth correcting Rachel, but he couldn't open either. The protagonist only raises her head, and the young man adds that he was hopeful, that these words would become reality. Then the young lady asks a little embarrassed as to what he's talking about, and the young man says, sure, the young lady has noticed that he can't control his powers very well. Because of this, he put her and his men in danger, as well as causing great disasters in the South. The guy, however, clenches his fists and says his parents are dead, and it's all because he was born with one heart. The girl says that usually dragons are born with two and can control their powers. The young man says this is true, but he also caused the suffering of those around him. So fear consumes Noel more and more the more valuable to himself he loses. He can't stop thinking that it could possibly happen again. After all, so many people have tried to help him, but nothing worked. And in the end, the only solution was that he is forced to wear various restrictive devices, but the stronger he gets, the harder it is for him to control. And then he met Eve. When they touched, a sudden rush of all-consuming power enveloped him. No one could control his power like this young lady. So in the end, let it be childish, but all he can do is ask her to stroke his hair. After all, it's the only time he feels how rare cold is for him, so he didn't object when Rachel called her friend. The guy looks into his cup and thinks the most important thing he couldn't say was how much he enjoyed their hug. The young man claims he must have caused them a lot of trouble. The main character says it's nothing and he can explain himself to that guy later. However, it was all clear and well to the girl now that her power, which she had thought good for nothing, could help Noel. But Eve is just a minor character who disappeared from the plot pretty quickly. For the sake of herself, who was burned, and for the sake of Zion, who suffered. So the girl can't agree to help Noel just because of an unassuming sympathy for her. And now that Rachel's memories are back, she can go south. And she has to think about how they can get into the human world before it gets even harder. The only thing she can do for Noel, it's hoping he finds his soulmate. Well, suddenly the main character's hand twitches. The girl doesn't understand why everything in her chest is suddenly so tight. At this time, the very same servant from the manor is wandering around the north. He wonders what makes the north so damn cold. The man thinks how careless of him not to think about the weather before heading north, since he has no money with him, so he can't even buy basic winter clothes. He had already approached a saleswoman who asked him if he had taken any money with him. The man claimed he would honestly come back and pay, so can the woman give him a loan? Natalia cringes at whether he takes her for an idiot, and then calls the servant a rogue and tells him to get lost. The man is shocked by this and curses the damn wolves, and also shrieks furiously that this weather is to their liking, but before he can finish his sentence, he sneezes. The man thinks it's so cold out there that the fire won't start, and whatever happens, there's no way the wolves will win his heart. He can't believe the captain's soulmate lives in a place like this, and she must have used a clever trick. Suddenly someone turns to my uncle and asks if he's cold. It turns out to be Zion. The man thinks it's just a curious wolf cub. He waves for the little one to step on. But the boy with white hair says he looks frozen and has snot streaming from his nose. The servant shrieks that nothing is flowing, and the young man doesn't even know who he is. The man claims their weather is terrible, and the boy with white hair only takes off his scarf and says he'll give it back. The servant refuses and says he doesn't feel cold, but he thinks how warm this scarf is. Well, he should return it after all. However, the man does say he'll lend the scarf for a bit, and Zion is happy about it. He then takes the servant's hand, and the man asks if the boy with white hair has lost his sister. Zion claims that there is, and he chased after the kitten and then lost himself without realizing it, and lost his brother and Ruby. A man realizes it's a missing child. He says he means the scarf the boy with white hair gave him to help him find his sister, and claims what a mischievous boy he is. But Zion says that's not true. And he would have given that scarf even if he hadn't lost it, because his uncle had also offered to help him when he heard he was in trouble. The boy with white hair continues his speech and states that his sister says that if someone is treated kindly, that one day it will be repaid, and if his uncle helped him, God will bless him for it. The man hadn't expected to meet such a kind child in the north, and it didn't matter if he was a wolf. The servant swears on his honor that he will not leave him until they find his sister. But suddenly the young man cries out that here is his sister. The man thinks how simple it was resolved, and the young lady cringes at how much more telling Zion not to run off alone. The man realizes that this girl is the older sister of the boy with white hair, but then behind him he sees the captain and Mrs. Rachel. The man immediately goes to the wall and wonders why he's there, but then the realization comes to him that it's the same companion Carmel told him about. So he asks the boy with white hair if this girl is his sister. The boy with white hair says it is, and the man then asks if this girl is the one who said if you treat someone kindly, one day it will be repaid. The servant realizes that such an elegant and kind girl is definitely human. So he felt a little sorry for suspecting her. The captain was staring at him like that. The man turns to the boy with white hair and thanks him, then states that there is a reward for kindness. And he's sure the young man will get it soon. after which he puts his hand on the baby's head and walks away. Sion cries out for his uncle to take the scarf with him, but the man turns around and confidently thanks the boy with white hair. He claims he doesn't feel cold anymore and then leaves. The protagonist thinks this man doesn't seem strange. Rachel realizes that Zion seems to really like this servant, and the lady with the white hair suggests they stop by the store and then go home. Everyone agrees. A little time later, the protagonist is already out shopping. She thought that for the rest of the day we'll have to look for Sion and will not be able to buy food, but the kids have become real helpers. The boy with white hair said he and Ruby would buy the meat, and Noel claimed he would follow them. And then the girl remembers what Noel said in the morning, the young lady wondering if it would be right to ignore his words. But suddenly, he hears someone screaming, and when the girl comes around the corner, she sees several men. One of them asks if the girl thinks she can get away from them that easily. The young lady only shrieks that she didn't get in anyone's face and didn't make a mess. She doesn't understand why guys are suddenly acting like this. The girl also cries out why only half-breeds are arrested and interrogated. The main character is a little shocked, thinking she hasn't heard of half-breeds being arrested, and the girl cries out that it's discrimination. Then one of them turns to Captain Wood. The protagonist wonders if the half-breed wolves will be arrested, but she doesn't understand why so suddenly. At this time, the guy turns to the young lady and asks if he wants to say that they didn't have trouble and loss because of her. But then who was sneaking into the human world and jeopardizing the wolves' reputation? Another young man claims that his blood boils at the mere thought that the bloody humans might despise them and raises his hand to strike the girl. But suddenly the captain tells him to stop, for he wants to ask the young lady a question. He then claims that if the girl agrees to cooperate, she and her brother will be safe. The captain then asks if she knows the half-blood brother and sister who have white hair and rare blue eyes. He tells the girl to tell everything he knows about them, but suddenly an apple falls from around the corner and one of the guys asks someone. The girl, however, quickly runs away around the corner. She hopes that she just misunderstood and they are not looking for her and Sion after all. They have been living in seclusion since long ago. But the guy did say that half-breeds had white hair and rare blue eye color, didn't he? So the girl wonders if they're still looking for them, and then imagines the worst possible outcome. The girl is very scared and thinks she needs to leave the north as soon as possible. Well, she doesn't understand how to do it and what illegal ways of migration exist. She arranges the books on the table and realizes they can't just move to another place without first learning permission. Eve thinks she'll do anything to get out of there with Zion. But suddenly someone turns to the main character. It turns out to be Noel. He claims that the girl came home before them. The guy asks her what she's been up to if Eve needs help. Then the girl was a little embarrassed. She says she was just looking for something and thinks she'll be done soon. So she asks if Noel can wait in the hall. The guy only sees the books of humans and tries to ask Eve about it. But Rachel beats him to it and asks if the girl wants to move to the human world. The protagonist says with a smile that it's not. But the girl says there's no need to hide such a thing from them because they know that Eve is trying to find a way to move there. The lady with the white hair thinks about how they learned and how much they know about it. And they may even know the fact that they are wolves. Rachel says she understands, as it must be hard for a young lady to live in a foreign land for so long. So she asks if the girl will go with her, because she and her brother were once in the human world, so they know how to get there. The protagonist is shocked to ask if Rachel has her memory back. The little girl, on the other hand, said the memories are blurry, so she's not sure she fully remembers everything. And if the girl is not mistaken, Noel once told her that there is a passageway in the south leading to the human world. And in other words, it's easier to get there through the south. The young man understands what his sister is implying, so claims she is right, because they signed an agreement and built the steamboat to make it easier for the residents to travel. The protagonist is shocked at such words. After all, according to these two, there is indeed an illegal way to immigrate. But the girl doesn't understand if she can be sure that the South is safe for them. After all, they don't yet know who Eve and Zion really are. But suddenly, Noel addresses her by name. He grabs the girl's hand and asks if the young lady will do him the honor of escorting her and Sion to the human world. The main character thinks how warm he is, and the guy goes on and says that he won't let others spread gossip about them being wolves just because they came from the north, and will keep them safe from all adversity. Eve thanks him for his kindness, but asks if they won't be a burden, since they helped her and Zion a lot without it. But Noel says not to worry about it. He puts his hand on the baby's head and says he'll use her situation to take Rachel home to the south, and that's enough for him. But the little girl sees that Zion is a little worried, so she decides to approach him. The young lady says they can stop by their house on the way. She hugs the young man and says she wants to see her sister and Zion for as long as possible. The boy with white hair says he wants to be with Ruby too. Eve thinks this may be her last chance if they continue to doubt. The only way to the south will close. They will see each other less often and eventually become strangers to each other because children quickly forget everything, including promises that are forgotten. Rachel, on the other hand, grins and thinks that there is no way she will let the young lady go to the human world, for very soon she will be her relative. Noel says with a smile on his face that he will have his men escort the young lady and Zion to the south as soon as possible, and the little girl realizes that the girl won't make it to the human world because it will make her fall in love with the South and forget about everything else. At this time, the captain is told that a man he wanted to see has been brought in, whereupon the guy says to look for this man to come in. He asks if this guy is an herbalist. The young man then asks where the merchant got the herb from. The guy with purple hair says it's from a doctor, and he thought this herb was good for immunity, so he bought it. Young says he is pleased with the doctor's goodwill and dedication, so he wants to give him a chance for a fresh start. But the man standing in front of him is not a doctor after all, but a simple distributor. He claims to understand that the young man was driven to it by need, and then throws a bag of money at his feet and tells him to tell all about the man who gave him this herb. And the more details, the better. A young man with purple hair looks at that money. He realizes that it will be to his advantage to tell, so he starts talking. The guy claims he didn't see the man's face clearly because he wore a mask to every meeting. But he's pretty skinny. And also, though hers insisted on being a man, it's more likely to be a girl. The guy claims he doesn't know if she intended to or not. She spoke in a low voice, but sounded pretty tense. This girl had white hair, if he's not mistaken. The captain's words state that the lad's testimony will grapple with one businessman's report. The young man says it's a good thing, and it seems to be the same person. A guy with purple hair asks what it's about. Oh, the captain replies that the man they're looking for is suspected of helping to illegally migrate to the human world, and the guy with the purple hair is one of the people who assisted her in this crime, so the captain says to take him away. The young man cries out that he is innocent and didn't know who the girl was. But the silver-haired guy tells him to realize that ignorance does not absolve him of responsibility. As this young man is led away, the captain leans back in his chair and sighs. He is holding a photograph of someone, and claims that now he can finally help Eve. At this time, the protagonist is having a conversation with Noel. Guy says there are some formalities to take care of before moving the new house, so he'll be back in the South for a couple days to get everything ready. But it won't take long. And the young man claims to be coming for her as soon as possible. The protagonist says she'll wait. But then seeing the guy fly away in dragon form is a little surprising. She thinks how beautiful it is. And if she and Zion manage to get out of the north, they can live independently. She had heard there was a large desert to the west. The girl realizes that Zion likes warm places, so it would be great to clean up her place and enjoy life. But first, they'll have to figure out how to get out of the south. After all, if Rachel gets home safe and sound, they won't need to date again, which means the guy won't lead them into the human world. The main character sighs and thinks how stupid she is, because she can't even take care of herself, let alone others if one day Noel meets her destiny. Then he would no longer need her powers, and until they reached the human world. That young lady would have to be helped when Noel asked, and it would be payment for all the good he had done them. At this time, Captain North is asked if he will go to investigate today. The guy says yes. After all, it's his first job as captain, and it's impossible to shirk, because he is responsible for the execution. The servant says he will try very hard. The guy looks at Eva's picture and says that since they're going outside anyway, he wants to look at that place first. But suddenly, who shrieks to the captain that they have breaking news. One of the servants asks if the guy is out of his mind, and how dare he barge into the captain's office without asking. The young man's gray hair tells the man not to make a big deal out of it. And something big must have made the guy act that way. The servant asks for forgiveness and says that a letter came from the dragon captain. The young man with gray hair thinks of the captain of the North. The sheet said that his subordinates, were going to visit the faces of the North in 3 days, and the location information would be described below. So the captain can familiarize himself and give his consent since they will not be there long. Special welcoming ceremonies are not necessary. Slua says that it may be a letter from the captain, but it's a total disrespect to the North to address them like that. The young man with gray hair puts the sheet to his face and says that his servant is right, for the captain clearly despises them. Moreover, it is very suspicious that he is asking them not to have a welcoming ceremony. I am not arrogant, and powerful dragons would do that. He gets angry and tells his servant to cancel some special events for the next 3 days. He wonders what the damn dragon wants, so he calculates to see it with his own eyes. The young lady is packing at this time. Zion tells his sister that they have packed all their things and can they go play now. The main character asks if it's true and says she's going to check it out, but the kids don't listen to her and run outside. Ava looks at the nearly empty room and thinks that they won't need a lot of things to get started, since they can buy everything they need in the human world. But suddenly she hears her brother cringe. The young lady immediately runs outside and asks what's wrong. She uses her ice power preparing to attack, but Zion only stares in surprise. That girl seeing many dragons flying towards her in the air, wondering what's going on. But then Noel approaches her and says he's come to get the girl. The protagonist is shocked to ask who these people are. Then the guy apologizes for their sudden visit and says they are his most trusted confidants. They will help them get to the south as soon as possible, and there aren't many of them, but the young man thinks they can move all the stuff. The guy says that packing must have tired Eve out because they suggest she go rest with the kids and leave the rest to them. The young lady doesn't know what he's talking about, but then Zion approaches her. He asks his sister if they will leave the North now. The girl asks if he will miss her, and the little guy with white hair replies that he won't, and then approaches the young lady and whispers in her ear that as long as she's with him, it doesn't matter where they are. The main character hugs him and tells him that she does too, and very soon they will move to a warm place that Zion will like. But suddenly, Eve hears the other dragons talking. They are saying what a lovely family bond it is. One of the dragons tearfully says he's only lived in the South since he was a kid, so he has no idea what the North is like, but it looks amazing. The protagonist realizes that she had forgotten they weren't alone out there. The girl thinks she should be more careful, but suddenly another dragon calls her coworker a jerk and asks if he thinks the companion about the captain's life with her brother is living alone in the forest for nothing. The young lady is shocked, and the other dragon says that his coworker is right, and she has a great, delicious choice of places to live, and in his opinion, it would be perfect to have their wedding there. Such words almost make the protagonist stonewall, while the dragons continue to talk and say that the ceremony should take place in the South. Ava wonders why Southerners already call her a life partner. The girl does not understand where this rumor came from and how she should be, because she has to explain everything to the dragons. Well, suddenly, the young lady hears someone's voice. The guy says that when he read that the captain doesn't want any welcoming ceremonies, he was curious as to what urgent business had compelled him to hurry. It turns out to be the captain of the North, Ed. He says it's all clear now, and whoever is responsible for the illegal immigration is in the South. Ed says that to deflect suspicion, Noel even provided them with false coordinates. So the wolf captain asks if he thought they'd fall for it and wait there. He also states that it is now clear how much the dragon captain despises wolves. A young man with gray hair furiously asks why Noel wants to take the Northmen with him to the south, and if he plans to get information about the wolves from them. He claims that he never thought he would resort to such a method. But suddenly, the young man's gaze falls on the main character, making him a little embarrassed, and asks if the girl's name is Eva, The protagonist is frightened by this, and the captain says there can be no mistake. He starts to approach the young lady and says that it's really her, and he's finally found Eve. But suddenly Noel grabs his arm. The wolf captain turns around and asks what he wants, and then tells him to remove his hand, but Eve only asks why he's there. The girl claims they lived in isolation like Ed wanted. Zion is worried about his sister, and the protagonist cries out, asking to be left alone. The guy is shocked by this. He asks why the girl is suddenly angry with him, and then turns to Noel and shrieks for him to let go. The girl, however, says it's all because he was the one who told them to get out of sight, and they did as the captain and said so. So Eve says to stop bothering them. The guy is silent at first, and then says that it's just as he thought, since he and his brother were the ones who wanted to move illegally into the human world. The main character remembers that girl. She wonders if the guy was really looking for them. The young lady asks what the wolf captain needs, and he replies that he just missed her. Eve asks in shock what he's talking about, and the guy continues and asks if the Southerners have agreed to help them get into the human world in exchange for a favor for them, and if the reason she wanted to leave there was because of a misunderstanding between them when they were younger, she had nothing to worry about now. Ed says he's changed a lot, and now he has the power to take the girl under his wing. But suddenly, Noel comes up from behind and says there must be some mistake, because Eve isn't leaving for the human world. And to the south with him. The captain of the wolves just smiles and says how silly that is, and then asks how the guy knows she wants to go to the south and not to people. But the protagonist in the back says Noel knows from her. The girl claims she doesn't care if Ed has changed or what power he's gotten. She just doesn't want to be there anymore. The young lady asks if he were in her shoes, he would want to stay living in restrictions. But then Ed asks why now, since he's been working his ass off to get this position. Because he knew Eve had suffered enough racism. The main character is a little scared. She wonders if the guy is going to tell about them being a half-blood. The young man with gray hair continues to speak, and Eve asks Togo in her mind to shut up now. After all, if all these people find out who they are, she and Zion could be killed. But suddenly Rachel arrives. She points at the girl and tells Carmel that this is her sister. The guy with green hair says with a smile this is where the lady life partner is. He walks closer to Eve and says they haven't seen each other in a while, and then apologizes for keeping them waiting. Carmel claims that their stuff is already loaded on the carrier, and it's time to go. But then you notice that the atmosphere there is a little strange. Captain Wolves, on the other hand, asks in shock if Eve is Captain South's life partner. The protagonist hesitates a bit, but then says that's just the way it is. She walks past Ed and claims to be Noel's companion. The guy's shocked by this. The main character walks up to Captain South and whispers for forgiveness. She's all shaky, and says that this is the only way to get Ed to get behind them, and the girl promises that she will explain everything as soon as they arrive in the South. Eve says she's incredibly sorry to alarm Noel again, but the guy only smiles. And then, using the power, says he understood her. He creates a large phoenix and says it's time for him and his beloved to hit the road. The knights agree and begin to turn into dragons, but the captain of the North cries out for them to stop now. He yells for Eve to tell the truth and asks if Noel threatened her. He also cries out that this type is dangerous. And the girl doesn't even realize what abominations dragons are capable of. But the young lady doesn't think so. She replies vehemently that Ed is the one who has made her life miserable, and he is far more despicable. The young man looks very hurt by this. He looks after the departing dragons and sinks into his thoughts. He realizes he can't protect her right now. The boy's father is a former captain of the North, taught him that half-breeds are not wolves. The guy's whole entourage belittled them, so he did, though, when his and Eve's gazes first crossed. Who, though he knew the girl was just despicable, only half a wolf. But I couldn't help but be fascinated by her. Back then, the guy was too young to realize he was attached to her. Ed was gnawing with guilt over his feelings for the half-blood. The boy was frightened because so many people were watching him. But even so, there was no forgiveness for what he had done to the young lady. From that moment, he had lived in regret. On the way home, the boy with white hair decided he should grow up soon and become a captain. So that no one else could offend Eva, the guy realized that he would definitely make sure that the young lady would be around under his protection. Now he tells his servants to go back. One of them asks if they should go in pursuit. Well, the captain only asks if it's possible to catch the ones that fly and claims they are powerless there. He turns around and says that so have the wards pick a couple of smart and proven subordinates to go after the dragons secretly. Guy thinks Eve is only half-wolf, so her power might be out of control. And who knows if these cruel dragons will take advantage of a young lady's weakness to brainwash her. He realizes that the only thing he can do now is to keep looking for her. At this time, the protagonist and her boys are flying the Phoenix. The girl realizes that they finally fly to the south. The protagonist did not think that she will have to go to the land of dragons on her own free will. Eve sighs and realizes that life is full of surprises. Suddenly, Noel turns to her. The guy claims that they have almost arrived and asks the young lady to look down, for the view is very beautiful. The protagonist asks if it's really possible from such a height. Then Noel says that if she doesn't mind, and then blushes and stammers, adds that he can support her by the hand. Rachel puts her hands over her face at this, and she thinks her brother is hopeless. The main character's wife asks if the guy has a fever. The young man replies that it's not like that, and he just wants the young lady to enjoy the view from there. He wishes to show the girl many wonderful things, for she has trusted him to come to the south. Guy says he hopes Eva will have only happy memories before being sent to the human world. The main character thinks Noel is very kind, but wonders if he remains so if he learns that the young lady is a half-blood. He didn't suspect anything before, but when he discovers the truth, it could end badly. Rachel turns to her sister and tells her that what she thinks will never happen. The main character asks what it's about, and the girl says that something seems to be bothering Eve and asks if the young lady is afraid of falling. Only halfway, the wolf agrees and says yes, because she's never flown. In the meantime, Eve thinks the girl scared her. The main character says she thought for a moment that Rachel could read minds. The girl just tells her not to worry because she will always be on her sister's side. Afterward, he offers to enjoy the view of the sky together. The protagonist recalls her mother's words. A woman was telling her daughter that dragons aren't as scary as she thinks they are. A little girl asked if her mom had ever met one of them. The woman says they're not at all. Then Eva lays her head on the bed and says that means her mom doesn't know anything. The woman puts a hand on her daughter's head and says that her great-grandmother used to tell her that dragons were kind. The little girl says it was a long time ago, and her mother replies with a smile on her face that the rumor of it has survived to their time, and dragons are very gentle creatures. So the woman said of her daughter that if she met a dragon, let her be kinder to him. The main character reaches out and asks if Noelle will hold her and Zion so they don't fall. The dragon captain agrees, and the lady with white hair looks at all this scenery. When they arrive at the castle, they are very surprised. Zion asks if they are in heaven. The protagonist says it looks like it. It's not at all how she imagined the South, and she can't believe there are so many flowering plants. The boy with white hair tells the young lady to look, for something has sat on his hand. Main game don't say butterfly, and she's only seen them in books before. The insect flies away, and the boy with white hair runs after it. Eve is worried about him and tells him not to jump because he might fall, but suddenly he crashes into someone. The little boy with white hair apologizes, and the man says he knows how to apologize and take responsibility. The servant then puts his hand on his head and asks if Sleep is doing well. The young lady realizes it's the man, and the servant says he failed to greet the girl properly last time. The man claims his name is Hopper, and he is serving under captain. He apologizes for being so late and asks to accept thanks for his help. The protagonist realizes she has seen him in the novel, and he is a versatile man who can't stand wolves. Although now the story is different from what she imagined, and the man seems friendly, but she is still not at ease in his presence. Hopper says that if the young lady needs anything, he asks her to let him know. Eve says that since that's the case, can she get a book in the form of a scroll that is only found in the South? The man is a little wary. He says they have a library of scrolls. Well, now it's going to be hard to get into it. The protagonist realizes that he is still vigilant, but the girl realizes that if she were in his shoes, she too would not have responded to the stranger from the North's request for the scroll. The man, on the other hand, says the road must have been rough, and then snaps his fingers, after which the young lady is already being led away by two maids. He tells the girl to first take an antidote and change into lighter clothing that suits the weather of the South. A little while later, the protagonist is already washed and well-dressed looking at this mansion. Hopper says the head of the department went to deal with the backlog of cases. Ava thanks him, for though she is a stranger there, she is treated well by everyone. The man only smiles. He claims the girl is the commander's companion, and the protagonist first lowers her eyes to the floor and is a bit silent, and then says to just call her Eva. Hopper says the young lady is too modest and asks if he dares call her by her first name, but the girl says she really would be more comfortable that way. He realizes that he should say that he is not the captain's companion, but the words don't want to be said. Then the servant asks if he can ask why the young lady needs a library, because if she tells him, the guy can find her a couple of books. The main character says she couldn't find books about the South and the North, so once there, wants to read dragon lore to help Noel. The girl wonders if she really intends to be the companion of the dragon captain. Hopper says it's clear to him now, and actually Noel would have been enough to have the girl around. But knowing history is good too, and it will help to get used to the young lady. The protagonist realizes that she must be careful, because if she is revealed, Sion will be in danger, and Noel too, because he has not yet found a real companion. The girl thinks it's unfortunate that she doesn't control her emotions well. The young lady realizes she is hopeless. That same evening, Ava sits with her books. She is reading about the history of the South Caspian continent. The book says that the heavens are ruled by God and the world is ruled by doom, while men rule the earth. Dragons whose lives are close to immortality have descended into this world. At first, they couldn't get used to their new surroundings. But with the help of their wisdom and the red dragon, they managed to establish themselves safely in the South. However, skirmishes between the proud and the dragons soon began to increase, and the beastmen began to suffer for it. So they asked the strongest red dragon to be their head. He had a good heart, so the guy took the weak under his wing. Meanwhile, some humans and wolves mistakenly thought that dragons had taken over the South. The head was injured when he fell for the evil trick of the humans, and the wolf took advantage of the situation and stole his heart. The first head could not cope with the overabundance of his power with only one heart. His situation was deplorable, so the dragon went to the north to return the heart, but they failed to find Togo Volga, and eventually the head of the dragons died, after which war broke out between the north and the south. The whole country was destroyed in the course of it, and the war ended through the intervention of the head of the mermaids from the west and the head of the lions from the east. After the announcement that the wolf had sold his heart to a dragon hunter he was collaborating with, a second war broke out between the South and the human world. Because of all these events, the world of humans and beasts was divided, so it became impossible to return the good relations between the South and the North, and the location of the heart remained unknown. The protagonist wonders if that's all it is, since she hasn't found any leads. The girl ponders whether Eve from the book could have influenced Noel's fever because she was a wolf with that heart. But the young lady realizes that it can't be like that. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been killed by Rachel's fire, because a dragon's fire can't burn the heart of a strong dragon like Noel. The more the protagonist thinks about it, the more confused she gets. The girl makes various conjectures. A little while later, Rachel comes into the library and tells her sister that Zion has fallen asleep because he has had a busy day. But the girl only sees that Eve is asleep. The little girl sits down in a chair and says that it looks like the young lady is pretty tired, but it's understandable to believe it's just a hassle, so it would be worth it to take the protagonist to her chambers. But then the little one has a better plan. The girl thinks it might be better to take Eve to the bridal room. The main character has a dream where she was a little girl. The girl wanted to go with her father through the woods. The guy pulls one flower out of the ground and shows it to his daughter. He claims it's a plant created by magic. The little girl is only angry with him and cries out for him to hurry up and gather the grass because it is already frozen. The man only says with a smile as she swears again. The main character says it's snowing so bad out there and they have to pick these herbs. Well, her father says we should hurry back. The little girl doesn't understand what has happened, for the snow has suddenly stopped. She turns to her father and asks if he has done this and if he has this ability. But the guy only looks at his hand in horror. After that, the protagonist wakes up. The girl immediately jumps out of bed and wonders what this place is and why she is wearing different clothes. The young lady gets out of bed and calls for her brother and Rachel, but someone says the kids are together in another room. When the protagonist turns around, she sees Noel there. The guy asks if she slept well, and the girl only asks in response why he is there. Noel then replies that these are his chambers. Eva asks in shock if it's true. Then he apologizes and says he'll leave right away. The young man rises from his desk and says it's okay. After all, it's only natural that she is there because everyone in the palace considers her the captain's companion. The guy claims they've prepared separate quarters for her, and then says if she's uncomfortable, he'll go somewhere else. But when he gets up, he cries out in pain. The girl asks if he's sore somewhere, and Noel replies that he's fine and just has a slight fever. Then the protagonist doesn't grab his hand and offers her help, after which the two of them sit on the bed. The young lady clings to his arm and says that since they arrived in the south, the fellow has not rested and must have worked hard. The dragon captain says that's right, and he's pretty tired today. But he's all embarrassed and says he's glad Eve is there. The young lady doesn't understand what's going on because his face is flushed. The girl puts her hand to his head and tells him that Noel seems to have a fever, then asks if he's sure he's okay. The guy claims that's not why he's blushing, but then decides not to say it after all. So claiming that it seems to be a matter of temperature, he takes Eve's hand in his, and a little embarrassed asks if she would allow herself to be hugged. The protagonist cringes at what he's talking about. The lady with the white hair is already herself embarrassed by this, and Noel is only getting closer to her. He says that when a girl is around, his thoughts get all jumbled up. The young man asks just for a moment to be like this. The main character says that if it makes him feel better, good. The girl thinks that maybe in a hug he can calm down and realizes that it's just a hug, because friends do that too. But the young lady notices that she can hear his heart beating hard and wonders why that is. Also, could it be because of her? But if she is right before, is it worth the courage now? Eve turns to Noel and asks him to forgive her. The girl realizes that this will probably turn out badly, but she still wants to know. The young lady asks if the young man was curious as to why she is not in the form of a beast and accepted living in the north. Eve wonders if Noel will like her if he finds out that the girl is a half-blood. But when the protagonist looks at his face, she sees surprise in the captain's eyes. She thinks about what to do now and realizes she asked the question for nothing. The young lady asks if the guy is surprised. She apologizes and says she's tired, so she says stupid things. But when the girl tries to step back, who trips over her pajamas and falls on the captain. The main character is embarrassed. She didn't even think about what to do in such a situation. The girl says it was an accident and apologizes. She claims she'll be up in a moment, but the guy only hugs her. He says the young lady is right and he is curious, and then adds that he wants to know everything about her, what she was like as a child, about her favorite foods, the thoughts that devote. And maybe there's something she'd like to keep quiet about, so he won't force it. But whatever it is, his feeling won't change. When I heard this, I began to tell you about myself. The girl says that when she was a child, she liked to spend time with her father. They made flowers out of ice and played. Dad was a man. Well, the protagonist thinks he knew how to control ice. At times, the spells failed and the snow melted. Medical herbs she had studied because of it, too. Noel smiled quietly and listened to Eve until he fell asleep, though the young lady couldn't admit to being a half-breed. But the young man's smile seemed to say that he would accept her no matter who the girl turned out to be, and it was a very emotional moment. Rachel is sitting with the papers at this time. A little girl is considering candidates to be her sister's maid. After finding a suitable one, who tells the bird to tell the servants that this maid will work for her sister. But then Cyan approaches her. The young man asks why Ruby is awake. The girl tells the boy with white hair that he got ears and a tail. Then he shrieks and quickly hides them. The lady with the black hair says she's worried about him, so she can't sleep. And Sion says it's too warm, so he's relaxed. Then the girl says he needs to hide his ears and tail well. Then the guy asks where his sister went and where he is now. Rachel says that sister is at rest, and Sion has his own room from now on, so let him not look for the young lady. The boy with white hair cries out, "Why can't he?" And the girl replies that it's late, and it would be unseemly to go to her now. Sion says that they've always slept together after all, and Rachel replies that now they'll have to learn to sleep alone. The boy with the white hair says it's just that up north, they only had one room with a fireplace. The lady with the black hair realizes that you can't let Sion in with these, the two of them, so asks if the boy with white hair wants to be an adult soon. The young man agrees and says he will become as strong and pumped up as his brother. Then Ruby says he'll have to stick to the rules. She holds out a piece of paper to Zion and tells him to write. The boy with the white hair does so, the first rule is you can't go to your sister's house at night. But then the boy with white hair tearfully says he can't sleep alone because he is scared in the dark. Rachel says she knows, so the second rule is that when he is scared, then let him go to her room. She is across the hall from him. Zion agrees. And the lady with black hair with a smile on her face thinks the young man is such a coward he said he would protect her. The girl thinks what a dummy he is. And yet looking at the paper, Rachel realizes that he can write. The morning the protagonist wakes up in bed, but as soon as she opens her eyes, the first thing she sees is Noel's chest. The young lady immediately jumps out of bed in embarrassment, and the dragon captain asks if she's awake and if she slept well, after which he says that if the girl doesn't mind, he will steal her time for a little while longer. The temperature seems to rise in the mornings. The young lady agrees. She remembers that last night she was talking and fell asleep. And the morning after, she completely forgot she was in his bed. Noel just hugs her. He states with a smile on his face that cuddling with her is most enjoyable. The protagonist thinks how loud he talks. Well, at that time, someone on the hallway shrieks, and Eve asks what happened. The dragon captain says it looks like her maid has arrived and tells this one to come in. Then a young lady with pink hair enters the room. Her name is Julia Carrot, and from now on she will serve the mistress. The girl says that he hopes they will get along, and in thought adds that by order of Mistress Rachel, she will serve her from this day forward. Since the young lady is a rabbit, her hearing is sharper than others, and surely Mistress has spoken of this ability of hers. Today was the first time she had met her mistress, so she was a little nervous. Standing in front of the door, the maid recalled the words that her mistress had beautiful white curls like snow. But then she heard the captain say that the temperature seemed to rise in the mornings. The maid had already made up her mind after saying that cuddling with Eve was the most pleasant thing she'd ever done. The maid was a little embarrassed, wondering if she was even allowed to listen to such a thing. She now introduces herself to her mistress and states that she is honored to serve her. The main character says her name is Eve. Noel, on the other hand, says she'll go and they'll see each other at the restaurant. The maid just thinks how beautiful Mistress is. The dragon captain asks if the girl wants anything special, and the young lady says she's not fully awake yet and doesn't feel much like eating. The guy says she needs to eat well, especially on hard days like yesterday. The maid, hearing this, is embarrassed and thinks what a sweet couple they are. When the protagonist starts eating, she is surprised by the amount of food on the table. She wonders if this is just breakfast, but it's not even lunch. Noelle asks if this kind of food is to her liking. The young lady only salivates to ask if she can get the recipe from the chef, and the guy replies that he'll ask her. He then asks if the girl has used that balm, because he picked it out himself, but he wasn't sure if she liked the flavor. Eva says it's wonderful, and it's the first time she's used something like this. The guy says he'll prepare more flavor options, so she can use different ones to suit her mood. The young lady, on the other hand, thinks Noelle seems to be wearing perfume too. And it's no wonder he always smells good. The protagonist is embarrassed to think about it. Noelle says that Eve is blushing a lot, and the girl cringes that it's just really hot in there, but then decides to come clean and says she actually remembered last night. The captain of the dragons smiles. He approaches the young lady and asks with a smile what happened then, for she was incredibly sweet and charming. The protagonist is confused and asks what it's about. She claims she thought wrongly about completely different things. The guy thinks about the same ones, and the girl says she just liked his smell, that is, the scent of perfume. The maids only cover their ears and say they heard nothing. At the same moment, Zion bursts into the room, and Eve thinks she's saved. A boy with white hair runs up to his sister with a smile on his face. He says he slept alone last night and asks what the nurse has to say to that. The young lady thinks he's good for her, and with his help, she's gotten past the disaster. She takes him into her lap and asks if her Zion has become all grown up. Two servants with hair on their heads come running after the boy with white hair. They tell the master to be careful. And when they see Eve, they immediately bow down and wish her good morning. Zion says they're his friends, and the girl awkwardly says what nice guys they are. Ruby comes running into the room after them. She says you can't keep up with the boy with white hair, and he runs very fast. Or rather, she's the one running slow, so he can't keep up. The young man apologizes, and Rachel walks up to her sister and spreads her arms as if expecting a hug, after which the protagonist sits her on her lap and tells her that her girl has grown up too. Ruby smiles and says that's good to hear. A little girl asks if she slept well last night. The main character replies that yes, and asks what about her. Rachel says she is too, and Zion looks at the two of them and says Ruby is cheating. The girl, however, continues with a smile on her face and says that she thought she would have nightmares if her little sister wasn't around. But last night, the dreams were wonderful. The lady with the white hair asks if it's true, because if it is, it's glorious. Noel, watching all this, can't hold back a smile. He thinks how much fun everyone is having, and it's the first time he's seen Rachel smile like that since his parents left them. The young man with black hair thanks Eve and Zion in his thoughts for this. He realizes that this girl makes everyone around her happy, and what he wished for before no longer interests him. The young man only wants Eva to be his wife, the only one who will be with him for the rest of his life, his love forever. But suddenly behind him, he hears someone's voice asking if it's true, and whether Noel believes her, because maybe the girl is lying to him. The dragon captain, hearing the unfamiliar voice, immediately turns around. But no one turns up behind except a servant who asks what's wrong. The young man with black hair turns around and breathes heavily, then says it's okay. The protagonist is worried about him, too. She asks if Noel's okay. The guy apologizes with a smile and says he was just thinking about it, and wonders whose voice it was. He feels like he's heard it somewhere before. Meanwhile, the maids are in the kitchen gossiping. The protagonist's maid says that's why the captain was smiling so much today. The other maids say they can't believe it. The lady with the pink hair asks if he did a bad job, and yet this morning they were hugging so tightly. Then one of the maids shrieks a little embarrassed that as much as Julia is curious, you can't eavesdrop on such things. The maid asks what's the big deal since it's good news, but suddenly the chief interrupts them. The woman asks who you have to be to just spin the captain like that. And then she hits Julia with a vegetable and asks if the maid is supposed to go down to the kitchen and if she's going to leave, and tells the girls the woman to wash the dishes. The lady with the pink hair says that they asked her to tell them everything, and she walks away and says it's nothing because she's not a talker. The woman just looks at the table and says that there is a lot of food left, and maybe the Northerners are too picky because what they started, they didn't finish. One of the maids turns to Maria and tells her that they are waiting for her outside. The chief asks why, and the girl claims her name is Hopper. Then the woman goes outside. She asks if the man is going to praise her, and he replies that he is, because the food was very much to their liking, and Maria did a good job, so he thanks her. The woman, however, says that if that's the case, then why didn't they finish so much? The servant says the girl is very tired these days, so she has no appetite yet, and it seems she wanted to go to the kitchen and learn to cook the same way. Then Mary thanks him for telling her that. She gets a little embarrassed and says they are lucky to have mistress. At this time, several people are wandering through the woods. One of them asks if it's a long way to the palace, and the other man in the robe says it's still half a day away. It turns out to be the captain of the North with his servants. He throws off his hood and thinks he will find Eve very soon. It's a warm, sunny afternoon outside, and Noel is still constantly busy. He apologizes for keeping him waiting. The young lady says it's no big deal, and she didn't even know he had so much work to do. She realizes that Zion has become infatuated with his new friends, and Rachel now suggests that her sister play together. The main character, on the other hand, thinks she likes the little girl more than she expected, and the girl claims that sister said her magic was the best. Eva thinks she was afraid that their meeting would take place like in the novel, but now she only wishes the baby girl happiness. Rachel is now showing her the highest spot in the castle from which the whole south can be seen. A little later, she brings her little sister to a clearing and suggests that they have a picnic there. Eva realizes that this is not what the relationship between Little Red Riding Hood and the she-wolf in the fairy tale was like, and perhaps they will become good friends. When they come back from that tree, the protagonist smells a very delicious odor. Julia says it's coming from the kitchen, and she heard that there's turkey for dinner tonight. The young lady says it's wonderful, and in her mind hopes every day will be so peaceful. But suddenly someone jumps out at her from behind the bushes and tells her that they've finally found Eve. It turns out to be the captain of the North, and the protagonist wonders if one can only dream of such peaceful days. She asks what the guy is doing and why he is in the South, and Rachel comes running up behind her. The little girl uses her powers and angrily tells the guy to get away from her sister. The one only smirks and says that she is the sister of the head of the South, who is the one following him. He jumps back and cries out that they fooled Eve and are still worried that he'll be able to reason with her. And it's disgusting and ridiculous. Rachel asks what he said and what other fooling he's done. Well, the guy doesn't let her finish and uses his powers. The main character is shocked by this. She cries out Rachel's name. The captain of the wolves, on the other hand, shakes his hands. He says that let the girl dragon, but still small, not realizing his involvement in the rebellion. Eve cries out that he's insane and asks what he did to the girl. The servant, however, says she's the head of the South's little sister, and if he finds out, but Ed says she's just passed out and it won't hurt her. After which the guy turns to Eve. He approaches her there with a smile on his face. He says it's scary in the South, so he offers to return to the North sooner. The protagonist is shocked by such words, and the maid immediately grabs the man and cries out for her mistress to run away from there. Ed only sighs, and then one of the captain of the North's servants pushes her away. At these sounds, more servants are shunned. They cringe at what's going on in there and what that sound is coming from the back door. Ed is just saying how much it pisses him off, and orders his ward to clean up the place while he takes Eve away. The protagonist only vehemently addresses it, and then claims she's going to finish him off. The guy is surprised by that answer, but then sighs once more and says they fooled her good, then uses his powers and tells Eve to be patient for a while, because it's time to say goodbye to those rascals. The main character only walks up to him and grabs him by the neck. She vehemently claims that no one has ever cheated anyone, and then uses his ice powers and says what a soulless guy. At this time, rumors are already resorting to these two. There is dust in the air, so they don't realize what happened there. But when the woman looks, she sees her mistress. She, looking at the lying Rachel and the wolf captain, asks what happened there. A little while later, Ed opens his eyes, and the first thing he sees is Noel's servants. They tell there to wake up. But when the guy looks at them, he sees that he's tied up, and Eve is also standing in front of him. The girl asks if the servants can leave them alone. They ask if the mistress is sure and argue that they'd better stay with her. But the girl says that if anything goes wrong, she'll call them right away, and then claims she has some things to deal with. The captain of the North asks why things turned out the way they did, and the girl realizes that she didn't even try to explain the situation to him. She used ice magic to finish him off. Something had interrupted her, or rather, it was Ed's ability, and it seemed the girl had met something like this before, the day she first met Noel, but she realizes it doesn't matter now. One of the servants states that they will wait outside and have the mistress call if anything happens. The protagonist realizes that, first of all, we have to deal with this guy. She bends over to him and claims it's the first time they've ever talked like this, because usually the young lady would run away from him. The girl asks why he pursues her if he hated her. Well, the young man replies that it's not like that. Eve asks what he's talking about, and the captain of the North says he sincerely apologizes for what he did when they were kids, and he understands why the girl blames him. Ed looks up and says that if the young lady could forgive and give him a chance, But the protagonist interrupts him and says he doesn't want it. Because why would she want it? Because even if every wolf begged for her forgiveness, she won't go back to the north anyway. Because after all she's been through, this place is like hell to her. And because she is a half-wolf, no one went looking for her father when he disappeared, so she had to use the search for herbs as an excuse to go everywhere looking for him. And her mother had to give birth without a nurse or doctor, after which she got sick and died. The girl asks how Ed can ask her to go back north, and if he has become sorry to lose his toy. The guy claims it's not like that, and he never thought of her that way. He swears that such a thing will not happen again, and if the young lady wants, he will find all her abusers, then bring them in, including himself. The captain of the North claims he's ready for anything for Eve, but the girl just looks at him with a blank stare, and then says her brother didn't even remember his parents, so he often asked if they had abandoned them. The young lady said they were really looking forward to his appearance, but they had to travel far away for work, and the boy with the white hair just needs to sleep 1,000 nights, and then they'll be back. As time passed, he stopped asking about them. The protagonist thought he was counting those nights, but it turns out that's not the case, and Zion figured it out on his own. The young lady tearfully says that the boy with white hair has realized that they are no longer in this world. She asks if Ed said he would do anything for her, and then asks if he will save her parents and if her brother will be able to see them. The guy just tilts his head and doesn't know what to answer, then apologizes. But Eve says it's too late, then rises. She says she didn't tell it to apologize. The girl claims that if the captain of the North is really the least bit sorry, then let him forget about her and never show his face. After these words, the protagonist leaves, and leaves the young man with gray hair alone. But when the girl comes out, she sees Rachel beside her. She immediately goes to her and tells her that the little girl is awake. She also asks how the little girl is feeling, and if she's hurt. The lady with the black hair says she's perfectly fine. The protagonist, on the other hand, looks at her and doesn't understand what's wrong because the little girl has a bit of a strange look on her face. At this time, a maid with a bandage on her head runs up to the mistress. She is all excited about her. So he asks a lot of questions about whether the young lady is unharmed or injured. The maid says she almost freaks out when she finds out her mistress asked to be alone with that wolf and asks if the guy hurt her mistress. Eve just tells her to stop bothering her. Then the chief comes running in. The woman takes the maid away and says she's sorry for her coworker. The pink-haired lady only cries out that she had to protect her mistress. The protagonist turns to Rachel and says they need to rest too. But when he looks at the place where the girl was, she's gone. The matter was settled and received belatedly. All about the incident, the dragons went into a frenzy. Now they had a good reason to destroy the North. But Rachel stopped them, and Ed disappeared before they came for him, leaving only a handwritten letter of apology. Now the protagonist realizes she doesn't want to get involved anymore now that everything is settled. But she doesn't understand why Rachel stopped the dragons. The young lady wanted to ask her the questions somehow cautiously and know that she hadn't been exposed yet. But the little girl was acting strangely for some reason, and that expression on her face the young lady really didn't like. The maid turns to her mistress. The protagonist asks if this one has already returned to work, and then says Julia could use some more rest. Well, the lady with the pink hair claims she's perfectly fine, and Maria has treated her well, and also just lying there is terribly boring. The girl looks at the floor near them on which the kitty is sitting, and claims that this little guy with white hair has been visiting them lately, and the girl feeds him all the time. And this cat appeared when the girl first arrived. The main character asks if he is a beastman, and the maid says he might be, but she doesn't know how to talk to him because even if he is a beastman, he is still very small. Then the maid remembers another important detail and asks if the mistress might not have told her about him. The protagonist asks why, and the girl replies that if anyone finds out she's taking care of an unknown kitten, she'll be chased away immediately. The young lady turns around and says sadly that this is true. The maid, on the other hand, wonders if she said something wrong, but then looking at his mistress realizes that this is not the case, and maybe the girl is just tired of her daily routine or misses her native land. She runs away and asks mistress to wait a little moments later returns, but no longer empty-handed. In her hands, the girl holds 2 glasses and a bottle of strong booze. The protagonist asks what it is. The maid replies that it is a special and expensive wine. A young lady asks if it's alcohol, and the girl comes up to her and says that when the thoughts become too much, you can forget. And with this, the best help is a drink. The protagonist wants to object, but as she looks at this bottle, she starts to have thoughts of whether she should save this bottle for later. There is also an interesting fact about this world, because although it is a world of beastmen, but there are ordinary animals there too, and most often beastmen take the form of humans, but there are also those that retain the animal form. That same night, the dragon captain explores the ground near those crates. Looking at his hand, he realizes that there is no trace of magic there, but he has heard that Eve has subdued the head of the North. However, the guy thinks that as strong as she is, it's pretty hard for a half-breed to stand up to a purebred wolf and wonders how it's even possible. Yes, and there wasn't a single trace of magic left there anymore, and it was as if they had completely disappeared. But suddenly, the guy remembers the moment they met. He realizes that even though the girl's father was human, but she can use ice magic, though the girl isn't that good at it. But sometimes her charms dissipate quickly. So the guy wonders if his hunch is right. He tells Hopper to prepare a secret letter and asks who the recipient will be. And the captain of the North claims that he will be writing a letter to the King of Men. The servant is a little surprised by this. And then, obeying his master, as Noel is about to leave, another servant approaches him. He apologizes for interrupting, but the fact is that something has happened to the gentleman's companion. That same evening, the protagonist and her maid were already sitting at the picnic. The girl argued that when drinking alcohol, it is important to choose the right place. There was that cat sitting next to them, and I was asking Julia if she could ask her something. The maid says she'll help in any way she can, of course. Then the young lady asks how the girl would approach if she knew she was going to be finished. The maid says it's a very serious matter, and usually in that situation, a person would probably hide somewhere. The young lady thinks she's been worrying for nothing and needs to get out of there soon. But Julia goes on and says she would have tried to fight. She argues that running away from fate is not a solution to the problem because she knows what will happen in the future. The maid pours wine into a glass and says she would try to face fate so that she would have no regrets. After which she says that her answer must have seemed too flippant to the mistress, though one might not go to fight the battle head-on, but try to strike sideways to avoid it. Then the protagonist drinks a whole glass of this wine in one go and thanks her maid afterward. She claims Julia has been a great help to her. The young lady ponders why she was only thinking about avoiding fate, for if she and Scion left, what would become of Noel and Rachel without a companion? And yet these two will face the tragedy that happened in the original novel, and the girl wonders if this is the best outcome of events. After all, she wants a different future for them. But suddenly, the cat jumps up and shrieks. The lady with the pink hair asks what happened to the baby and then sees Maria. The woman says furiously that she couldn't figure out where the wine had gone. She grabs Julia and tells her it's all her doing. Another maid approaches the mistress and asks her if she liked the wine. She also says it's their head cook. Then the protagonist says the wine is very sweet and she doesn't know who infused it, but the flavor is lovely. The woman lets the maid go and says that means mistress knows how to drink alcohol, and if she wants, the woman will recommend hay, a better drink, and suitable appetizers. The protagonist agrees, and now the servant informs his master that his companion has gotten very drunk. The young lady is having a lot of fun with a glass of stiff booze. She shrieks that it's true and plot development along the lines of, "My real brother, who I lost 10 years ago, turned out to be the one I almost fell in love with after going through numerous trials," is very popular. The servants claim this is unbelievable and ask the mistress what happened next. The protagonist is a bit of an afterthought, and then asks her not to address her so formally and to call her by her first name. In an atmosphere of merriment and general cordiality, when everyone is absorbed in the alcoholic fun, the servants address the young girl as Mrs. Eve, reinforcing the sense of friendship and camaraderie that reigns between everyone at this moment. Eva turns to them. inwardly regretting the fact that despite the informal setting, they still address her using the formal mistress, but realizes it's unavoidable and takes it for granted. At this moment, the protagonist notices Noel. At his appearance, the servants, gripped by slight fear and respect, immediately drop to their knees, showing their reverence before their master. Noel, however, not wanting unnecessary ceremony, waves off the greetings and asks a question, eager to find out who got the young lady so drunk, causing him concern for her condition. Eva, ignoring his concern, offers him a mug of wine, assuring him that the drink is indeed very tasty and worth trying. At this time, he is approached by the chef, who shares his observations, saying that apparently Eva really liked the wine they made, but things ended up getting out of hand, causing him some embarrassment. She adds that they have been trying to keep Madame from drinking too much alcohol, and if Noelle is looking for the culprit in this situation, she is ready to take full responsibility by showing her willingness to be held accountable for what happened. But the young lady only hugs Maria and tells Noel not to dare touch her. The guy is a little shocked by this, and the young lady asks if he knows how hard it is to prepare food, and they have to eat everything that is so laboriously prepared by the cooks. But then she turns around and says she might have another drink. But the young man with black hair takes the glass from her hands. He takes the protagonist by the hand and states that drinking a lot is bad for her health, and she will be sick for a few days. Despite the fact that the protagonist does not pay attention to the words of her interlocutor, she continues to hold her hand on Noel's chest and is surprised to note how unusually warm and pleasant his touch is, while the servants whisper that apparently the girl is indeed Noel's faithful companion. Although the young man tries not to show his embarrassment, internally he feels a great deal of excitement and even some confusion, realizing that the girl may have had a little too much to drink, and suggests that she seclude herself in a room so that she can rest and recover. However, the protagonist, paying no attention to his proposal, slowly sinks into sleep, realizing that for a long time she has not allowed herself such a luxury as a drink, and now alcohol seems incredibly sweet and enveloping to her, and sleep will seem the best way to cope with its effects. But suddenly, the young lady begins to show wolf ears and tail, which becomes a complete surprise for all the servants present, who in horror and bewilderment shrieked, realizing that their mistress is a wolf, which they did not expect to see. One of the servants, not hiding his surprise and excitement, asks how this could happen to Mrs. Ava, but Noel, wanting to keep the situation under control, strictly orders him to shut up and not to spread the word about what happened. In a serious and determined tone, he declares that he himself will later announce the events of the evening to everyone, but warns that if anyone present decides to do so before him and reveal the secret, it will be bad news. The captain of the northern lands, expressing his rage and dislike for troublemakers, declares that anyone who dares to break this rule and disseminate information before his authorization will answer for it with his own head.